Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Delayed Reflection, a Mirror's Sinister Deception. I had never thought much about my reflection before. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the radiator wheezing in the corner, a sound I usually ignored. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, that same chipped frame I had for years. The air smelled faintly of bleach and lavender soap, comforting in its familiarity. But as I looked into the glass, I hesitated. The face staring back at me seemed off. Not wrong exactly, but different, like a photograph that had been printed too many times, edges blurring. My eyes narrowed, the skin looking paler than usual, shadows deeper under the cheekbones. I shook my head and leaned closer, pressing my palm to the cool porcelain sink. "It's just tiredness," I muttered, though my voice sounded hollow, a little too low. I blinked, the reflection's eyes flickering just a fraction too slowly. I stepped back fast, nearly tripping over the bath mat, and the face in the mirror caught up, mirroring my stumble with a split-second delay. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Get it together. But the unease didn't fade. Instead, it settled in the pit of my stomach, twisting tighter with every glance. I wasn't drunk. I hadn't taken any new medication. Yet something was wrong, something that science couldn't explain, or at least hadn't yet. I could hear the muffled sounds from the street below, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the distant rumble of a bus grinding to a stop. The city smelled like rain, wet asphalt, damp leaves, and the faint metallic tang of a nearby bakery's ovens. Outside, the evening was folding into night, and the streetlights flickered on one by one, their amber glow stretching long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Back inside, the apartment felt colder. The radiator's wheeze had slowed, and a draft crept beneath the door, carrying with it the faint scent of cigarette smoke from the neighbor's apartment. I wrapped my arms around myself. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe my brain was playing tricks after the diagnosis, the rare neurological disorder they'd named but hadn't explained in detail. The one that made recognition unreliable, that made faces, especially my own, slip through my mental fingers like water. I went to the living room, where the large, full-length mirror leaned against the wall. It was an antique piece, its surface slightly warped from years of settling. I'd never liked it much, mostly because it made me look taller and thinner than I was, but it was the only one big enough to check my outfit before heading out. I glanced into it and froze. The reflection blinked, but this time, there was a subtle delay that made my skin crawl. I jerked my head to the side, testing the angle. The reflection mimicked me, but with a hesitation so slight, I could swear it was deliberate. I swallowed hard. "No," I whispered. "You're just a mirror." But the thing in the glass smiled. Not a full smile. More like a twitch at the corner of the lips, not mine. I knew my own smile. This was something else. I blinked again and it vanished, replaced by the blank, neutral face I recognized. I laughed nervously, a dry sound that caught in my throat. "See? Nothing." I reached out, fingertips brushing the cold glass. The mirror gave back the same touch. Yet the feeling lingered, like the air had thickened, like the room had tilted ever so slightly. I moved away, running my hands through my hair, which had been growing out since the last haircut. It was too long, a tangled mess that felt like a physical weight against my neck. Maybe I should just shave it off. That was something I could control. Unlike this. The disorder had crept up on me over the last few months. At first, it was small things, mixing up people's faces, mistaking strangers for coworkers, and I'd laughed it off, shrugged it away. Just tired, I told myself. But then came the bigger problems, not recognizing myself in photos, or worse, not recognizing myself in the mirror at all. The neurologist called it prosopagnosia with a twist. A rare variant that affected self-recognition. The words felt clinical, detached, but inside me, they hammered like a warning bell. I glanced toward the hallway mirror near the coat rack. It caught the dim light from the living room, and for a moment, I saw a figure there. Not me. Well, sort of me, but not. The reflection's head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes narrowing like it was studying me. I blinked hard. The figure straightened, smiled. That smile again. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My hands trembled. I pressed my palm against the wall, rough plaster biting into my skin, grounding me. It's not real, I told myself. But it felt real. Too real. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. I jumped, heart pounding. It was a message from Sarah, my sister. I hadn't told her about the disorder. Didn't want to worry her. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, but I didn't respond. Instead, I moved toward the kitchen. The linoleum floor was cold beneath my bare feet, sticky in places where I'd spilled juice the night before. I poured a glass of water, the cold liquid sliding down my throat, but it did little to calm the tightness coiling in my chest. I caught my reflection again in the small window above the sink. This time, the face looked tired and drawn, the eyes shadowed with exhaustion. And yet, in the corner of the glass, a second reflection lingered, a shadowy image, not quite aligned, like a double exposure in a photograph. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the second image was gone. I leaned against the counter, breathing shallow. This wasn't normal. I'd read stories about people with neurological disorders losing their grip on reality, slipping into delusions, but this felt different. More sinister. Like the reflection was trying to tell me something, or worse, watching me. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. The street lamp outside flickered again, and for a moment, the apartment was plunged into near darkness. The radiator coughed back to life, a sudden blast of heat washing over me. I ran my hand through my hair and tried to laugh. Get a grip, idiot. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirrors were not just showing me my reflection. They were showing me something else. Something waiting. I didn't know what, exactly. Not yet. But I was beginning to suspect I wasn't alone in those reflections anymore. The next morning, sunlight leaked in through the threadbare curtains, casting dull rectangles on the cracked linoleum floor. I didn't want to look, really. But I couldn't help myself. The distorted doubles from last night weren't just figments of an overactive brain. No, they were something else. Something deliberate, calculated. I shivered, the radiator clicking and coughing somewhere down the hall, trying to warm the apartment, but failing. The smell of old wood and damp paint filled the air, thick and unyielding. I wasn't ready to tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I understood what was happening. But I knew I needed help. The disorder, the one that made me unable to recognize my own reflection, was no longer just a neurological curiosity. It was a threat. And I had to investigate. I shuffled into the kitchen, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and a distant dog barking somewhere outside, sharp and urgent. I stared at the small mirror hanging above the sink. Normally, I avoided it, but today I needed answers. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and touched the glass. It was cold, colder than I expected. Something shifted in the reflection, the slightest twitch of my lips, but not mine. Someone else. The mirror image smiled, a slow, crooked grin that didn't reach the eyes. I jerked back, knocking over a cup. It shattered on the floor, the shards glittering like tiny stars. My breath hitched. No! That wasn't possible. I was imagining it. I had to be. I grabbed my phone and called Dr. Harper, my neurologist. The line rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, it's me," I said, voice uneven. I need to come in. Something's wrong." There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "You sound rattled. What's going on?" "I keep seeing things in mirrors. Not just my reflection. Others. They move independently. They look at me like they know me, but they're not me." Dr. Harper's voice softened but remained firm. "You know this isn't the first time you've mentioned visual distortions. But this sounds different. More intense?" "Yeah. More intense. Like they're watching me. Waiting. All right. Come in this afternoon. We'll run some tests. Try to figure out what's triggering these episodes." I hung up, heart still pounding. The idea of sitting in a sterile office, surrounded by blinking machines and clinical white walls, made my skin crawl. But I had no choice. I needed answers. I tried to distract myself by making coffee, the bitter smell filling the cramped kitchen. As the hot liquid slid down, I stared again at the mirror. My reflection was normal now, or as normal as it ever was, but the unease lingered. I could almost hear the whispered voices, soft and indistinct, like a radio tuned slightly off frequency. Later that morning, I started a careful inventory. Every mirror in the apartment, every reflective surface. The bathroom mirror, dulled and streaked with toothpaste, the tiny one on the back of my phone case, the chrome handle on the front door, even the windows, smudged with rain. I covered each one systematically with towels or sheets. The apartment felt darker, smaller, suffocating, but I needed to see if the phenomena persisted when the reflections were hidden. Hours passed. No strange movements. No extra faces lurking behind my own. A fragile relief bloomed inside me, but it was quickly smothered by a gnawing doubt. Was it the mirrors themselves? Or something else? I was still lost in thought when the doorbell rang sharply, slicing through the quiet. I wasn't expecting anyone. My hands trembled as I moved toward the peephole, pressing my eye against the cold metal. Outside stood Mark, my neighbor from 2 floors down, holding a package. "Hey," he said when I opened the door, voice low. "I found this on the stairs. Thought it was yours." I took the box, fingers brushing his briefly. He looked concerned, like he'd seen something he didn't want to admit. "Thanks," I muttered, closing the door slowly. The box was unmarked, heavy, and emitted a faint metallic scent. I set it on the counter and eyed it suspiciously. Mark's visit unsettled me more than I cared to admit. He didn't usually come by uninvited. And the package, who had left it there? What was inside? I grabbed a knife from the drawer and carefully sliced through the tape. Inside was a small, battered photo album. The cover was cracked leather, worn smooth from years of handling. I opened it, and the smell of old paper and dust filled my nostrils. Inside were pictures, dozens of them. People I didn't recognize. But then, I flipped a few pages, and there they were. Me. Or versions of me. In different places, at different times, but all unmistakably me. Some photos were recent, taken just days ago, based on the clothes I was wearing. Others were older, from years before I even knew I had the disorder. I swallowed hard, a metallic taste creeping into my mouth. I didn't remember being followed. Or photographed. One photo caught my breath. It was taken in the hallway outside my apartment. Someone had snapped it just as I looked into the mirror there, but the reflection was wrong. My eyes were looking in one direction, my head turned another. The angle was impossible, like a double exposure again. And behind me, in the reflection, stood a shadowy figure. Tall, indistinct, watching. I slammed the album shut and sank into a chair. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the edges to steady myself. Why was someone doing this? Watching me? Documenting me? The disorder was supposed to be rare, private. How could someone else know? The radiator clanked nearby, and the wind rattled the window frame. Outside, cars passed, tires hissing on wet asphalt, but inside, the apartment felt like a trap. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos again, heart hammering. Another message popped up. Unknown number. Stop looking in the mirrors. The message was brief, cold. No name. No number I recognized. I dropped the phone on the table, the screen cracked slightly from the fall, the light flickering weakly. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. This wasn't just my mind unraveling anymore. Someone else was involved. Someone who knew about the disorder. About the reflections. I tried calling Mark back, but the line went straight to voicemail. I left a message, voice tight, if you know anything about the package, please call me. Silence. Complete silence. The shadows in the corners of the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, stretched longer as the afternoon sun dipped behind the buildings. The mirrors, hidden beneath towels, felt like silent sentinels, waiting. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting my own brain. I was being hunted. And whatever was coming next, it wouldn't wait for me to be ready. The phone's cracked screen blinked weakly on the table, casting a pale glow over the peeling wallpaper. Silence. Complete silence. Outside, the relentless hiss of rain on asphalt, cars sliding through puddles, tires throwing up spray, but inside, the apartment was a tomb. All those mirrors, the ones I'd covered with towels and blankets, felt like ticking time bombs, waiting for me to slip up. I sat back, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the phone, as if touching it again might make the message vanish. Stop looking in the mirrors. The words burned into my brain. No name. No number I knew. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Or worse, someone was inside this. I rubbed my eyes until they stung. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, maybe the rust from the radiator, or maybe the copper tang of my own sweat. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream. To run. But where? Every reflection could be a doorway, every glance a trap. The phone buzzed again. I glanced down. Another message. Same number. Meet me. Midnight. 5th Street. Alone. My breath hitched. Midnight was hours away. I could call Mark again, but his voicemail was still the same, cold and empty. I didn't know if I wanted to talk to him or avoid him altogether. Trust was a luxury I didn't have anymore. I stood, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The blankets shifted slightly over the largest mirror near the doorway. I stared. I thought I saw movement, a flicker. But when I blinked, nothing. Just the dull, lifeless glass behind the fabric. I paced, each step echoing in the hollow apartment. My hands were clammy, fingers curling into fists. I tried to steady my breathing, slow it down. But the racing thoughts were relentless. Why me? Why this disorder? Why now? I pulled open a drawer and dug out an old flashlight. The beam was weak, but enough to slice through the shadows. I crept toward the mirror in the hallway, the one I'd been avoiding since the first strange episode. The fabric was loose, edges fluttering in a draft I hadn't noticed before. I pulled it away slowly. The reflection stared back at my own face, pale and drawn. But then it shifted. The eyes weren't quite right. They darted left when I looked right. The mouth twitched into a sinister smile before snapping back to normal. My heart slammed against my ribs, sweat pooling at my temples. I blinked hard. The face was still. Normal. But the image was burned into my mind. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The crash made me jump. The silence returned, heavier now. I needed answers, not hallucinations. I grabbed my jacket, shoved my phone into my pocket, and left the apartment. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick, reflecting the neon signs of closed shops and the flickering streetlights. The cold air stung my lungs with each breath. Walking to 5th Street, I tried to make sense of it all. Was this some kind of sick game? Who would know about the disorder, about the reflections? And how could they manipulate what I saw? The city felt different tonight, distant, hostile. I passed a hot dog stand, the smell of grilled onions and burnt sausage cutting through the damp air. I grabbed a bite, the salty grease settling uneasily in my stomach. My hands trembled as I ate, eyes scanning every dark alley and window. When I reached the designated corner, the streetlight flickered overhead, casting long, jittery shadows. No one was there. Minutes passed. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, lean, face obscured by a hood. My throat dried up. "You got the message," the voice was low, almost a whisper. "Good." I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded. "Who are you?" I finally managed. They stepped closer, the streetlight revealing sharp features, eyes cold and calculating. "You don't know me, but I know you. And I know what's happening to you." A chill ran down my spine. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, voice barely steady. The figure smiled, but it didn't reach their eyes. "Because you're the key to something bigger, something they want. And they're watching. Always watching." I swallowed hard, the weight of those words pressing down. "Who's they?" The figure hesitated, then pulled something from inside their jacket, a small, battered envelope. "Read this. Then decide if you want to be a part of it." I took the envelope, fingers shaking as I opened it. Inside was a series of photographs, old, grainy shots of different people, all staring into mirrors. All with the same haunted look in their eyes I'd seen in mine. And then a note, handwritten, scrawled in uneven letters. "They don't just want to replace your reflection. They want to replace you. For good." The words blurred as a cold sweat broke out. I looked up, but the figure was gone. Just like that, vanished into the night. I stood alone, the city's hum pressing in from all sides. The envelope felt heavy in my hand, like a stone anchoring me to a nightmare I couldn't wake from. No going back. No escape. The mirrors weren't just tricks of the mind. They were weapons. And I was the target. The city never truly sleeps, but that night it felt as if the streets themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break loose. I stood on that cracked sidewalk, the envelope still heavy in my palm, fingers numb from the cold that wasn't just the weather. The distant hum of a late-night train rattled through the air, a sharp metallic screech cutting through the quiet like a warning. I glanced over my shoulder, empty street, Nothing but shadows stretching too long beneath flickering street lamp light. The note's words spun in my mind, relentless. They don't just want to replace your reflection. They want to replace you. For good. The phrase clawed at me, raw and urgent. Who were they? And what did it mean to be replaced? I was starting to understand that this wasn't just a twisted delusion born from my disorder. There was something or someone out there, watching, waiting. I stuffed the envelope into my jacket pocket, the fabric rough against my skin. My breath fogged in the cold air, sharp and biting, and I realized I'd been standing still too long. The city's hum was a low growl now, like it was warning me to move, to run, or to hide. But where? Back in my apartment, the half-lit room greeted me like a trap. The faded wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the mirror above the dresser reflected the dim light, but something was off. I caught a flicker, a twitch in the glass that didn't sync with my movements. My stomach knotted, muscles tightening like coiled wire. I approached slowly, breath shallow, hands trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the dresser to steady myself. The reflection stared back, but it wasn't me. The eyes were sharper, colder, like mine, but sharper. I blinked. The image copied me perfectly, but the smile was wrong. Too wide. Too forced. I stepped back, heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. The room seemed to close in, walls whispering secrets I couldn't quite catch. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat and forced myself to speak, voice barely above a whisper. Who are you? No answer, just that unsettling grin. My fingers grazed the glass, cold and smooth, but the reflection's hand didn't move in sync. It lingered for a moment too long before pulling away, disappearing like a shadow melting at dawn. My breath hitched. I pulled the curtain over the window, shutting out the world and its twisted reflections, but the tension didn't ease. If anything, it felt like the air had thickened, pressing down on me, suffocating. I paced. The envelope burned in my pocket. I needed answers. I needed help. But who could I trust? The figure from the street had vanished without a word. A ghost? Or something worse? The phone rang suddenly, sharp and jarring. I jumped, nearly dropping it. The caller ID was blocked. Hello? A pause. Then a voice, low and steady. You're closer than you think. I swallowed. Who is this? No one you want to meet. But if you don't want to disappear, listen carefully. The line went dead. Silence. Complete silence. I dropped the phone onto the bed, the plastic bouncing against the mattress. My hands shook harder now, sweat mixing with the cold, slick and uncomfortable. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, but my mind raced. Disappear? What did that mean? Had I already begun to vanish, piece by piece? The next morning was a blur. I barely slept, eyelids heavy as I stared at the ceiling, willing the shadows away. The sun spilled weakly through the curtains, but it couldn't brighten the darkness inside my head. I decided to check the photos again, the ones inside the envelope. Grainy faces, all staring into mirrors with the same haunted eyes. Names scribbled on the back, people who had vanished, disappeared without a trace. Was I next? I traced a finger over one photo, a woman with hollow cheeks and a fractured smile. The words beneath her name were barely legible. Lost to the glass. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The disorder had isolated me, made me question every surface that reflected me, but this was something else entirely. Something human and calculated. I needed to find the figure from last night. The one who'd given me the envelope. Maybe they had answers. Maybe they could stop this before I became another ghost trapped behind glass. I headed back to the spot where we'd met. The street was quieter now, early morning fog curling like smoke between the streetlights. I scanned the shadows, heart quickening with every step. Then I heard footsteps, uneven and slow, approaching from behind. I spun around, breath catching. Looking for me? The voice was familiar, but colder now. The figure stepped into the pale light, face obscured beneath a hood. Why me? I demanded, voice steadier than I felt. What do you want? They smiled thin, cruel. You don't understand, and that's why you're perfect. They need someone who can slip through cracks, someone nobody notices until it's too late. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. Who are they? And what do you mean need someone? The figure laughed, a dry sound that scraped against the night. You'll see soon enough. Suddenly, their hand darted into their jacket, pulling out a small, sharp blade. My heart slammed against my chest like a frantic bird trying to escape. Stay away! I shouted, backing up, every nerve screaming. But they didn't stop. The blade glinted under the street lamp as it sliced through the air, a whisper of steel. I dodged, stumbling over uneven pavement, breath ragged, mind screaming for a way out. The street felt endless, a maze closing in. I tripped, hands scraping against the rough concrete, taste of blood bitter in my mouth. The figure loomed, steps deliberate and slow, ice cold and unblinking. I scrambled to my feet, desperate. My fingers found a loose stone, and with all the strength I could muster, I hurled it at them. The stone struck the figure's shoulder, eliciting a grunt. They stumbled back, and I didn't hesitate. I ran. The pounding of my feet echoed down the empty street, heart threatening to burst. Behind me, the figure's curse hung in the air, a promise and a warning. You can't hide behind your reflection forever. Breathless, I ducked into an alley, pressed my back against the cold brick, and closed my eyes. The envelope felt like a weight pulling me down, but I clung to it like a lifeline. What did they mean? Hide behind my reflection? Was I already slipping away? Was the disorder only the beginning of something far worse? The city's sounds dimmed, the distant dog barking, the faint hum of a car engine fading into the morning. Shadows clung to the corners of the room like forgotten secrets, refusing to be chased away by the flickering candlelight. I was trapped between mirrors and shadows, between who I was and who they wanted me to become. And I didn't know if I could fight it. But I had to try. Because if I didn't, I might never come back at all. The alley was colder than I remembered, the chill settling into my bones like a warning. I stayed pressed against the brick, the rough plaster scratching my skin through my shirt. My breath came in ragged bursts, each one tasting sharper than the last, metallic, like I'd bitten my tongue. Blood mingled with sweat on my lips. The envelope, still clenched in my hand, felt impossibly heavy, as if it carried the weight of everything I was running from. Behind me, the city whispered. A siren wailed in the distance, fading into the static of early morning. Somewhere nearby, a garbage truck rumbled over cracked pavement, its brakes squeaking like nails on a chalkboard. The faint scent of spilled gasoline mixed with rotting leaves. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves, but the pounding in my chest wouldn't relent. I should have moved. I knew I should, but my legs felt like they'd turned to jelly. The figure's words echoed in my mind, you can't hide behind your reflection forever. What did that even mean? Was it some kind of threat? A promise? Or just nonsense from someone who had lost their grip on reality? My fingers tightened around the envelope. Inside, the papers rustled softly. I wanted to open it, to find answers, but something held me back, maybe fear, maybe hope. The city shifted around me, indifferent and alive. A pigeon cooed nearby, flapping its wings against the chill. I looked up, catching a flicker of weak sunlight through the narrow gap between buildings. The day was breaking, slow and unforgiving. I stood, knees wobbling. The alley felt smaller now, suffocating. I tucked the envelope into my jacket and started walking. No plan, no destination, just away from where that shadow had loomed. Back in my apartment, the silence was suffocating too. The blinds were drawn tight, but the room still smelled faintly of the damp air from outside. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clatter somehow louder than a shout. The faint hum of the refrigerator buzzed in the background, steady and unyielding. I moved to the bathroom mirror hesitantly, heart thudding in my ribs like a warning drum. The reflection stared back at me, but not quite. The edges were blurry, the image flickering like a dying television signal. I blinked, and it sharpened again, but the sense of wrongness lingered like a bad taste. No distorted versions today. No hostile glances or mocking smiles. Just me, quiet and uncertain. I touched the glass with my fingertips, cold and hard. The mirror didn't respond, it didn't move. No one tried to pull me in or replace me. Just silence. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. Days passed in a strange blur. I kept the envelope close, like a secret talisman. Inside were old photographs, grainy, yellowed pictures of a man who looked remarkably like me, though older, wearier. Notes scribbled in the margins, dates, places. It was a history I hadn't known I had, a puzzle piece of a past I didn't remember living. I spent hours poring over those images, tracing the lines on their faces, searching for something familiar. Each photo told a story of someone trapped in his own skin, struggling against something invisible but no less real. I called the number scrawled on the back of one picture, voice shaking as I left a message. No answer. One evening, just as the sky turned a bruised purple, I heard a knock at my door. Sharp. Insistent. My throat tightened. My hands trembled as I moved toward it. Who is it? I called, voice barely above a whisper. Someone who wants to help, came the reply, low and calm. I hesitated. The lock clicked, and the door cracked open. A woman stepped inside, eyes cautious but steady. She carried a worn leather bag and smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My name's Elise, she said. I know what you're going through. I've seen it before. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. Elise told me about others who had lived with disorders like mine, rare, misunderstood, terrifying in their own right. She'd worked with specialists, psychologists, even neurologists who tried to unravel the same knot I was tied in. No magic, no ghosts, just the fragile, messy truth of the human mind. She didn't sugarcoat the struggle. She spoke of long nights, therapy sessions that felt like battles, moments when reality bent so far it threatened to break completely. But she also spoke of hope. I won't lie, she said, eyes steady, it gets worse before it gets better. But you're not alone. Her words settled over me like a balm. Not a cure, not a fix, but something more precious, understanding. That night, I stared at my reflection for longer than I had in weeks. The face looking back was tired, scarred by fear and confusion, but it was mine. No flickers. No shadows lurking just beyond the glass. I traced the line of my jaw, the curve of my lips. I whispered my own name, testing it like a lifeline. I am still here. Weeks turned into months. The distorted figures didn't vanish entirely, but they lost their power. I learned to recognize the difference between my mind playing tricks and the reality I could grasp. Therapy helped. I stumbled through it, sometimes doubting, sometimes desperate, but always moving forward. I changed. Not into someone new, but into someone who could live alongside the disorder instead of being swallowed by it. One afternoon, walking home, I passed a storefront window. The glass was cracked, spiderwebbing from a stray baseball or maybe just time. For a moment, I froze. The reflection wavered. But then I smiled, small and steady. I caught my own eyes in that fractured mirror and nodded. I was still me. Distorted, maybe. Bruised and broken, definitely. But me. And that was enough. Later, when the city quieted and the streetlights flickered on, I pulled the envelope from my jacket again. This time, I unfolded the papers carefully, not as a burden but as a chapter in my story. I wasn't hiding behind my reflection anymore. I was standing in front of it, head held high. The unknown wouldn't disappear, but it didn't own me. Not anymore. Story 2, Parallel Commute, Lost in Shifting Realities. The morning air was sharp, biting just enough to make the skin on my cheeks prickle as I stepped out the door. I locked the door behind me and shuffled down the cracked sidewalk, boots crunching over scattered gravel and a few stray pine needles. The neighborhood was quiet, save for a dog barking somewhere a block over, sharp, impatient, as if it too was eager for the day to begin. Streetlights still flickered weakly, though the sun was halfway up, washing the sky in pale blue and streaks of pink. The faint smell of wet asphalt and distant coffee shops drifted out from the small strip of stores at the corner. I liked mornings like this, calm, predictable, the kind of start that promised routine. Routine, though, that was part of the problem. I'd been doing the same thing for weeks now, walking down to the corner where the carpool gathered. 5 strangers, every day, in the same battered minivan with the faded Carpool Express sticker peeling off the back window. I'd met them all in bits and pieces. Lisa, the woman who always smelled faintly of cinnamon and wore oversized scarves even in spring. Tom, whose laugh was too loud and sometimes felt like it was hiding something. Claire, quiet and always tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. And then there was Mark, who usually sat up front, eyes glued to his phone. And me, the odd addition. The one they all seemed to accept without question. I knew how that sounds. Strangers, meeting every morning, sharing a ride to work, normal, right? Except they talked about things that didn't quite add up. About the cities they'd been to, places that sounded like mine but weren't. Parallel versions of our town, they called them, with subtle differences in the skyline or the layout of the streets. I'd laugh it off at first, the way you do when someone tells a far-fetched story. But the more I listened, the more I noticed the cracks. This morning, for instance, Tom was talking about a coffee shop that supposedly closed years ago when I was certain still stood at the corner of 5th and Main. Claire nodded along, her eyes glazed but attentive, while Lisa wrinkled her nose like she smelled something sour in the story. I swear, it's gone now, Tom said, tapping the dashboard. Replaced by some tech startup or something. Heard it from a friend. But I passed that corner on my way here. Just yesterday. The same faded green awning, the open sign flickering in the window. I wanted to say something, to argue, but the words caught in my throat. What if I was remembering wrong? What if my own memories were faulty? We all fell silent after that. The car's heater hummed low, a faint rattle from the engine blending with the soft murmur of the radio, which was playing some old jazz tune that made the whole interior feel like a dimly lit bar somewhere far from here. The windows steamed slightly from the warm air inside meeting the cold glass. I wiped a circle clear with the back of my hand and glanced out. The street was waking up. A mail truck rattled by, its engine coughing. A man on a bicycle zipped past, his wheels crunching over the gravel shoulder. A woman walked a toddler, the child dragging a worn stuffed rabbit along the pavement. Ordinary sights, ordinary sounds, but none of them fit into the strange stories floating around this car. I tried to push the thoughts aside. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I'd been reading too much into things. Still, an uneasy knot tightened in my stomach. Lisa reached over and turned off the radio, breaking the silence. "You all right, Jamie? You look like you're somewhere else." I blinked, realizing I'd been staring out the window too long. "Yeah, just thinking." She nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're quiet today. Not like the others." I shrugged, pulling my jacket tighter. Cold mornings don't do much for conversation. Mark glanced up from his phone, his eyes dark and unreadable. "If you don't like it, you don't have to ride with us." The words landed heavier than I expected. Not hostile, exactly, more like a warning. I swallowed and looked away, the texture of the cracked leather seat under my fingers grounding me briefly. The car rolled to a stop in front of a drab building with chipped paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly in the cold air. The place smelled like burnt coffee and old newspapers. Claire pulled her bag tighter against her chest, eyes fixed on the cracked sidewalk. I hesitated, then stepped out, the cold biting through my gloves as I closed the door. For a moment, I watched the others head inside, their footsteps echoing hollowly in the empty lobby. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow that made everything feel too bright, too sharp. I caught my reflection in the glass door, pale face, tired eyes. Someone I barely recognized. That's when I noticed it. The calendar on the wall. The date was wrong. A day behind, maybe 2. I blinked. Looked again. The numbers didn't change. My stomach dropped. Had I lost track of time? Was this some kind of mistake? I rubbed my temples, the rough edge of my beanie scratching against my forehead. The faint smell of bleach mixed with stale coffee made me gag a little. My hands trembled. Was I imagining things? Had I slept through part of the week? Inside, the others were already seated, chatting quietly. Tom's voice rose with a laugh, but the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones was distant, like through water. Lisa caught my eye and gave a small, knowing nod as if she understood the confusion but refused to say anything. I forced a smile and stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me. Something wasn't right. Not with the city, not with the stories, but with me. And maybe that was the real threat. The next morning, I woke up with a bitter taste in my mouth, like stale metal mixed with burnt coffee. I couldn't let it go. Not yet. The carpool was supposed to leave at 7:15, and I was already late. My hands trembled as I pulled on my jacket, the worn fabric rough against my skin. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, the kind of morning that scraped your lungs raw with every breath. The street was quiet except for a distant dog barking, short, urgent yips that echoed off the cracked pavement. I caught a waft of something faintly sweet, like exhaust mixed with a hint of cinnamon from a nearby bakery. Odd. Cinnamon. I didn't remember that smell from before. When I arrived at the usual pickup spot, the group was already there. The old sedan idled with a soft hum, its headlights dimmed, fog curling around the tires. Tom was leaning against the hood, scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable in the low light. Lisa stood beside him, arms crossed, staring down the street as if expecting something or someone. "Morning," I said, my voice rough, cracking in a way that made me wince. Tom glanced up and gave me a quick nod, but didn't speak. Lisa's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and unsettling. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "Could say the same to you," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, but the words felt hollow. There was a pause. Then, almost too casually, Lisa added, "Did you check the calendar yesterday?" I blinked. "Yeah. I saw it." "Why?" Isn't it just a mistake? I tried to sound dismissive, but my throat tightened. Lisa's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, or was it a sneer? Not a mistake. It's deliberate. Tom finally spoke, his voice low and steady. We all noticed. The date's been off for weeks now. Except you always act like you're the only one who didn't catch it. I swallowed hard. That's because I didn't. I mean, I did, but only yesterday. The words were clumsy, fumbling over themselves, betraying the knot tightening in my chest. Lisa shifted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're forgetting things, aren't you? I laughed, but it was dry, brittle. Maybe. Or maybe you're all just messing with me. Tom's gaze sharpened. We're not messing. None of us are. I looked away, toward the street lamp flickering overhead. Its yellow glow sputtered, casting long, uneven shadows. Then what is this? What's going on? Lisa's eyes darkened. You don't want to know. Not yet. Her words hung between us like smoke, thick, choking, impossible to ignore. We climbed into the car. The leather seats were cold, the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering beneath the new car scent. I noticed the dashboard clock was stuck at 6:42. Another detail that didn't add up, but I kept quiet. It felt wrong to question everything out loud, especially when the others seemed to share this strange, unspoken understanding. As we pulled onto the street, Tom started talking, or rather, recounting. His voice was calm but insistent. Yesterday, I was downtown, near the old library. I saw this street vendor selling roasted chestnuts. Didn't think much of it until I realized the library's been closed for months. Renovations, they said. Lisa snorted softly. Not in my city. The library's been a community center for years. I frowned. Wait. So you're saying the same place exists, but different? Tom shrugged. Exactly. Parallel cities. Or something like that. I chewed the inside of my cheek, the salty tang reminding me I hadn't eaten since last night. I don't remember any chestnut vendor. The library? It's still closed here. For real. Lisa's eyes flickered to mine. That's what I mean about forgetting. You're losing pieces of your own story. The car passed a row of identical brick townhouses, their windows dark. The street lamp's glow was now steady, but the cold had seeped into my bones. I glanced at Tom, then Lisa. They weren't joking. They believed this. And if they were right, then what was happening to me? I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my mind kept pulling me back to the calendar. That date. How could something so simple be wrong? How could a day just disappear? Tom pulled the car into a parking lot near a coffee shop, the one with the faded red awning I passed every morning. Let's check something, he said, already stepping out. Lisa followed, and I hesitated before joining them. The air outside was colder than I expected. A breeze swept past, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic like rusted iron. Inside, the coffee shop was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, the hum blending with the low murmur of a radio playing old jazz. I ran my fingers along the rough plaster wall. It felt gritty, almost sticky. The barista, a woman with dark circles under her eyes, glanced up as we entered but said nothing. Tom approached the register. What's today's date? The barista blinked, then glanced at a small calendar taped behind the counter. March 14th, she said without hesitation. I felt the air thicken. March 14th. That was 2 days ahead of the date I remembered seeing on the calendar yesterday. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. See? Another shift. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. When I opened them, Tom was pulling out his phone. He tapped the screen, frowning. It's March 12th on my phone. No idea why the calendar says otherwise. The barista shrugged. My phone's on March 14th too. Maybe it's the new update. I glanced around the shop again. Something was off. The chairs looked newer, the paint fresher. Yet the menu board behind the counter was smudged, the letters peeling at the edges. The coffee smelled burnt, bitter, like the last dregs of a forgotten pot. How long has this coffee shop been open? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The barista hesitated. Since last summer. Why? I swallowed. The place had been closed for renovations in my memory. Closed for months, actually. Lisa's voice cut through the tension. You're slipping, or the world around you is. I wanted to argue. To say it was just confusion, exhaustion. But the knot in my stomach tightened, twisting into something colder. Back outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the awning overhead. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter. Let's keep moving, Tom said. There's more to check. The car started, and we drove in silence for a while. The streets looked familiar but wrong, like a photograph with smudges on the edges. Houses with windows that didn't match the ones I remembered. Storefronts replaced by empty lots. Even the skyline seemed shifted, as if someone had nudged it just slightly. Lisa finally spoke. I found this a few days ago. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and unfolded it. Disappearances? I echoed, heart hammering. She nodded. All around here. People who claimed they saw the shifts. Who asked questions. Then gone. Tom glanced at the list, his jaw tightening. We're next if we don't figure this out. I stared at the paper, the edges stained and frayed. The names looked normal, but each one felt like a warning etched in ink. My hands trembled again. This time, it wasn't just nerves. It was fear. Real, sharp fear. Why me? I whispered. Lisa's eyes met mine. Because. The car's engine hummed low, a steady drone beneath the uneasy quiet between us. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the loose leaves against the cracked windshield. I watched the streetlights flicker, their glow sputtering like a dying heartbeat. Lisa was scrolling through her phone, muttering numbers and addresses I barely caught, her brow furrowed deep enough to crease the skin above her eyes. Tom's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. I could taste the stale remnants of burnt coffee lingering at the back of my throat, bitter and sharp. Lisa finally broke the silence. I found this a few days ago. Her voice was low, cautious, as if she wasn't sure whether she should say more. She held up her phone, and the screen showed a grainy photo. It was a faded flyer, the edges curled and torn, pinned to a bulletin board beneath a strip of flickering fluorescent light. The text was half smudged but still legible. Parallel Cities Symposium tonight, 8 p.m., Civic Hall. I blinked. A symposium? That sounded official. Organized, even. But nowhere in my memory had I ever heard of anything like that. And yet, seeing Lisa's face, the set of her jaw, the way her eyes darted nervously, I wondered if I was the only one who hadn't. Why didn't you say anything before? I asked, voice catching. Why keep it quiet? She shrugged, biting her lip. Because I wasn't sure if I wanted to believe it. And because some of the people involved, they're dangerous. Dangerous. The word echoed in my mind, cold and sharp, like broken glass underfoot. Tom glanced over, his expression unreadable. Dangerous how? Lisa hesitated. They don't want the truth getting out. They'll do whatever it takes to keep the parallel thing under wraps. You saw the way that barista looked at us. Like we weren't supposed to be there. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. The city outside seemed to lean in closer, shadows gathering beneath street lamps, stretching long and thin like fingers. The familiar streets I'd known all my life now felt like a maze with no exit. Look, Tom said, voice steady. We can't just run around chasing ghosts or wild theories. We need facts. Something solid. I wanted to agree. I really did. But every time I tried to hold on to what felt real, the memories slipped like sand through my fingers. The coffee shop that had been closed for renovations in my mind was now open and bustling. The buildings we passed looked wrong, shuffled around like pages torn from a book and reassembled. It's not just the cities, I said, voice low. It's me. My memories. They're changing. Erasing things I'm sure happened. Lisa's eyes softened, but there was a shadow behind them, something I couldn't quite place. You're not imagining it, she said. I've seen it too. Little things disappearing, details shifting. It's like reality is folding. Folding? Tom repeated, eyebrows raised. I shook my head. I don't know how to explain it. But it's happening. To all of us. For a moment, the car was swallowed by silence. The only sound was the rain tapping against the windows, light at first, then steady, like a slow drumbeat. Lisa's voice cut through finally. The symposium. It's tonight. If we're going to understand what's really going on, we need to go. I hesitated. My gut clenched, the cold settling deeper into my bones. Going meant stepping further into this mess, into something I didn't understand but already felt like it was swallowing me whole. Can we even trust those people? I asked. They're the only ones who might know the truth, Lisa said. Even if they're dangerous. Tom exhaled sharply, then nodded. We don't have much choice. The car slowed as we approached a cluster of aging brick buildings, their facades worn and pockmarked, windows dark except for one dimly lit hall. The Civic Hall. I could smell damp concrete and something faintly metallic in the air, like iron or old blood. A distant dog barked, sharp and sudden, then silence. I looked at Lisa. After tonight, there's no going back, is there? She shook her head, lips pressed tight. No. The engine cut off, and the sudden quiet was so loud it made my ears ring. We stepped out into the cold, the air biting at my skin, rough and unforgiving. The door to the hall creaked open, revealing a narrow corridor lit by flickering bulbs that cast long, jittery shadows. Inside, the crowd was small but intense, faces I didn't recognize, eyes sharp, scanning, calculating. The air smelled of sweat and cheap perfume, a strange mix that made my stomach twist. At the front, a man with a cracked voice spoke about layers of reality and hidden agendas. His words felt rehearsed, like lines memorized and repeated too many times. But then, a woman near the back caught my eye. She smiled coldly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something about her felt off, too controlled, too aware. I tried to focus, but the room seemed to shift, the walls inching closer, the floor tilting. My hands trembled, fingers twitching like they wanted to reach out but couldn't find anything solid. Suddenly, a sharp voice behind me whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. The woman was there, standing too close, her breath cold against my cheek. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to steady my voice. She smiled again, whiter this time, but there was no warmth. I'm someone who knows what happens when you dig too deep. The lights flickered violently, plunging us into momentary darkness. When they came back, she was gone. Just like that. I blinked, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst through my ribs. Lisa grabbed my arm. We need to leave. Now! Outside, the rain had stopped, but the city felt different, colder, sharper. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow. Behind me, the civic hall loomed, a black hole swallowing everything. I realized then, I wasn't just losing my grip on memories. I was losing my grip on safety, on trust, on the very idea that I could walk away. Because the threat wasn't parallel cities or shifting realities. It was the people who wanted to control what I and we believed. And once you're in, there's no turning back. I didn't know what I was getting into. But I knew this, tonight was the point of no return. The rain had stopped, but the air, cold and heavy with silence, still clung to me, damp, heavy, like a wet blanket that wouldn't let go. The streetlights buzzed droned above, that sick flicker casting long, twitching shadows. Civic Hall stood behind me, dark and empty, a gaping maw swallowing whatever light tried to touch it. I could almost hear it breathing. Lisa's hand tightened on my arm. We need to leave, she said again, voice low, urgent. I nodded, but my legs felt glued to the cracked sidewalk. The woman's words echoed in my head. You shouldn't be here. And then that smile, too wide, too cold, like a knife's edge. I swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline mixed with something sour and bitter I couldn't place. Was it fear? Or something else? I wasn't sure anymore. We started walking, slow steps that felt like moving through molasses. The city around us was the same, but everything felt wrong. The kind of wrong that presses down in your chest and makes your skin crawl, even when nothing's visible. Lisa glanced back once, then forward again. Her eyes were sharp, scanning shadows like she expected something to jump out. I wanted to ask her what she thought was out there, what she really believed, but the words stuck in my throat. Do you think that woman, I finally said, voice barely above a whisper, she's part of this? The whole parallel city story? Lisa didn't answer right away. The sound of a distant dog barking cracked the silence, sharp and sudden. Then a car passed, tires splashing through a puddle, water spraying cold against my ankle. I don't know, she said. But I know it's not just stories. Something's going on. Something dangerous. I nodded again, trying to steady my breathing, but my chest felt tight as if someone had wrapped a wire around it, twisting slowly. We reached my car. The interior smelled faintly of old coffee and stale leather, a comfort after the damp chill outside. I fumbled with the keys, hands trembling. Lisa was already sliding into the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror like she expected to see someone or something following us. Did you notice? I blurted out as I started the engine. The stories last week, the differences. It's like they don't remember the same thing. Or maybe they want me to forget. Lisa's eyes flicked to me, sharp and steady. You're not crazy, she said. At least, not yet. I wanted to believe her, but the doubts gnawed at me. My memories were slipping, little pieces vanishing like smoke. The faces in the carpool, the places they described, they felt like fragments from someone else's life. A life I couldn't trust anymore. The radio crackled. I reached out, twisting the dial, searching for something familiar. Static. Then a voice, low and urgent, breaking through the noise. If you're hearing this, don't trust the carpool. They're watching. They know what you've seen. The broadcast cut off, replaced by dead air. Lisa's hand was on my knee, firm and steady. What was that? I shook my head, heart hammering. I don't know. But it's not a coincidence. We drove in silence, the city blurring past in streaks of yellow and gray. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every reflection in the glass felt like I was watching, waiting. When I pulled into my driveway, the street lamp above flickered again, once, twice, before going dark. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old paper. The floor creaked beneath my feet, the rough plaster walls pressing in. I moved to the window, peering out into the night. The street was empty, but the silence felt thick, almost suffocating. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from an unknown number. Don't trust anyone. Not even me. I stared at it, the screen's glow harsh in the dark. My hands trembled as I typed back, fingers clumsy. Who is this? No reply. The room felt colder. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer, trying to see beyond the faint streetlights. Something caught my eye, a shadow flickering at the edge of the yard, just beyond the tree line. I blinked. It was gone. I should have called the police. I should have told Lisa to stay away. But instead, I sat down at the kitchen table, heart pounding, mind racing. What if the carpool wasn't about parallel cities at all? What if it was a cover? A trap? A game I'd been pulled into without realizing? And what if the woman with the cold smile wasn't warning me, not protecting me, but threatening me? The thought twisted inside me, cold and sharp. I opened the notebook I'd been keeping, flipping through pages filled with scribbles, dates, names. Every entry was a thread, and I was dangerously close to unraveling the whole thing. But the more I read, the more the edges blurred. Names I'd written down yesterday felt unfamiliar. Places I'd visited seemed like memories borrowed from someone else's life. A sudden knock at the door made me jump. Sharp, insistent. I froze, breath caught in my throat. Who is it? I called out, voice shaking. No answer. The knock came again, louder this time, urgent. I crept to the peephole, heart lodged in my throat. Outside, the porch light flickered, casting wild shadows. Nobody was there. Just the night. Cold and empty. I backed away, feeling the walls close in. The notebook slipped from my fingers, pages splaying open on the floor. And then, as if from nowhere, my phone buzzed again. Look outside. I didn't want to. But something pushed me, a terrible curiosity that burned hotter than fear. Slowly, I moved to the window, pulling back the curtain. Across the street, under the flickering street lamp, stood a figure. Dressed in dark clothes, face obscured by a hood. Still as a statue. The street was silent except for the faint hum of the city, the distant wail of sirens, and my own ragged breathing. I blinked. The figure raised a hand, then turned and disappeared down the alley. Silence. Complete silence. My hands trembled so hard I had to grip the windowsill to keep from falling. The threat wasn't parallel cities. It was here. In the shadows. Watching. Waiting. And now, it knew I was awake. The night dragged on like a slow bruise beneath my skin. I sank to the floor, the notebook sprawled open beside me like a fallen map. The pages were smeared with my own restless scribbles, looping words that no longer felt certain. I tried to piece together what I'd learned, what I thought I knew, but the edges kept fraying. The carpool, the cities that weren't, the erasing memories, it was all tangled, like threads pulled from a worn sweater. I rubbed my palms over my face, the rough stubble scratching at my skin, and tried not to let the unease settle too deep. Sleep finally came sometime after 3 a.m., shaky and thin, like a candle flickering against a draft. When morning seeped through the blinds, gray and hesitant, the world looked different, not less threatening, just quieter. The air smelled faintly of rain, damp and clean, and the coffee I made tasted bitter in a way that matched the tightness in my chest. I didn't want to go back to the carpool. Not today. Not ever, maybe. But the knot of obligation and curiosity pulled me out the door anyway. I needed to know if any of it was real, if any of them were real, or if I was just unraveling into something I couldn't hold together. The street was empty except for the usual morning rush, but the usual felt off. The cracks in the sidewalk seemed sharper, the colors drained just a little too much. I walked slower, eyes flicking to every corner, every shadow. A man across the street glanced at me, but his face didn't register, like he was a stranger I should know but couldn't place. At the meeting spot, the others were already there. The carpool group, the strangers who claimed to live between cities no one else saw. They smiled, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. Or maybe they did, but only to hide something deeper. I caught the flicker of recognition in their glances, but it felt hollow, rehearsed. Linda, the oldest woman, handed me a coffee cup. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice low, almost cautious. I nodded, fingers trembling as I took the warm cup. The aroma of dark roast grounded me, a small tether in the shifting reality. "Did you see him?" Jake's question cut through the air, sharp and sudden. I froze. "Who?" "The man outside your place last night. The one under the street lamp." I swallowed hard. "Yeah." He looked at me like I was the last piece of a puzzle he'd nearly solved. "You're not imagining it. He's been watching all of us." "But why?" I asked. My voice barely rose above the hum of the idling engine. Linda shook her head. "That's what we're trying to figure out. He's not from any city we know. Just shadows." The car was quiet as we slipped into our seats and pulled away. The city rolled past in muted tones, buildings and people blending into a blur of routine. But my mind was jagged, sharp edges cutting through every thought. The erasures, the discrepancies in their stories, the figure, none of it made sense. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real threat wasn't some otherworldly place or mysterious travelers. It was here, human, present, and patient. Watching. Waiting. Days passed in a strange kind of limbo. I stopped writing in the notebook, the words feeling pointless when the memories they tried to capture kept slipping away. I caught myself staring at familiar places, my apartment, the corner cafe, the cracked pavement outside, wondering if I'd been there before or if it was just a fragment planted by some cruel trick of my own mind. I stopped asking questions aloud. The group grew quieter too, their conversations more guarded, eyes darting to the windows and doors as if expecting shadows to seep through the cracks. One afternoon, I found myself back on my porch, the notebook in hand despite my promise to abandon it. The pages were worn now, edges curling like dried leaves, and as I flipped through, I noticed something I hadn't before, a series of names, all crossed out except mine. My breath caught. Why mine? What did it mean? I heard a soft scrape behind me and spun around. No one. Just the empty street, the low hum of distant traffic, the faint smell of rain lingering in the air. My hand shook, the notebook slipping slightly before I caught it. Later that evening, I called Linda. Her voice was quiet, tired. "We need to meet," she said. "There's something you have to see." The next day, we gathered in a cramped cafe, the kind with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of stale coffee. Linda slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were photographs, grainy, black and white pictures of people I didn't recognize, standing in places that looked eerily familiar. "They were in the carpool," she said. "Before us." Before you. Her eyes searched mine. They all disappeared. I felt the cold press of a truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't about parallel cities or erased memories. It was about people vanishing, swallowed by something or someone that left no trace. I traced a finger over one photo, a man with tired eyes, holding the same coffee cup I'd been given the morning after the figure appeared outside my window. Do you think this is what happens to us? I whispered. Linda nodded slowly, the weight of it settling between us like dust. They get erased. Out of time, out of place. Forgotten. And just like that, the carpool wasn't a mystery of other worlds anymore. It was a trap. A slow, invisible snare tightening around us, erasing us not from reality as a whole, but from the records, the memories, the connections that made us real. I left the cafe feeling hollow, the photographs burning a hole in my pocket. The air outside was thick with approaching rain, and the distant rumble of thunder felt like a warning. That night, I didn't wait by the window. I didn't look for the figure. Instead, I packed a small bag of water, my phone, the notebook, and left a note on the kitchen table for anyone who might find it. I'm leaving. For good. I don't know where, but anywhere is better than here. The city felt colder than usual as I stepped outside, the wet pavement slick beneath my feet. The streetlights flickered, the shadows stretching long and thin. Behind me, the door clicked shut. I didn't look back. Weeks later, far from the carpool, far from the flickering lights and impossible stories, I sat in a small apartment with a window overlooking a quiet street that no one had ever warned me about. The notebook lay on the table, its pages empty now, except for one last entry. Remember this. Remember me. The rain tapped softly against the glass, steady and sure. Outside, life went on, indifferent, relentless. And somewhere, in the distance, I could still hear the faint echo of footsteps. Story 3, Quantum Voices, Echoes from Parallel Realities. The morning smelled like wet concrete and burnt toast. I lived alone on the 10th floor of an aging building in the outskirts of the city, not far from the research facility where I worked. My apartment was small, functional, really, with a narrow kitchen that smelled faintly of stale coffee and a living room cluttered with books, cables, and a pair of noise-canceling headphones that had become my closest companions. The walls were thin, plaster cracked in the corners, and the radiator rattled every time the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. In the evenings, the street lamp outside flickered like a bad omen, casting jittery shadows across the peeling wallpaper. You're going to be late again, my neighbor's voice drifted through the thin wall as I grabbed my coat. Old Mrs. Patel had a way of sounding disappointed even when she was just saying hello. I didn't answer. I hated small talk before coffee. The walk to the lab was routine, but something felt off. The usual rhythm of my steps against the cracked pavement, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a stray dog, everything seemed slightly out of sync. The pigeons that normally clustered near the fountain in the park were absent, and a faint buzzing noise hovered just beyond the edges of hearing. I caught myself scanning the faces of passers-by, looking for that spark of recognition or familiarity, but they all seemed withdrawn, their eyes glossed over or focused somewhere inside themselves. I paused outside the entrance to the facility, a hulking brick building with barred windows and a security checkpoint that never seemed to care enough to check anything properly. The smell of oil and ozone seeped from the vents, mixing with the metallic tang of the city air. I smoothed my shirt and pushed through the heavy door. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pallor over the sterile corridors. The hum of machines filled every corner, computers, cooling fans, and the low whir of dozens of servers working overtime. I made my way to the quantum communication lab, a cramped room filled with equipment that looked more like a tangle of wires and blinking lights than the cutting edge of science. The experiment we'd been running was supposed to revolutionize how information traveled, instantaneous, unhackable, a leap beyond fiber optics and satellites. But last night, something had gone wrong. I set my bag down and flicked on the monitor, the screen flickering to life with lines of code and readouts. The lab was mostly empty. Most of the team had gone home hours ago, except for me and Dr. Kim, who was buried in paperwork at the far end of the room. I rubbed my eyes, the faint taste of toast still lingering, and sat down at my station. That's when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was interference, just static or some glitch in the system. But there was something else layered underneath, voices. Fragmented, distant, almost indecipherable. I leaned closer, frowning, adjusting the frequency knobs on the receiver console. The chatter grew clearer, but it wasn't in any language I recognized. Or maybe it was English, twisted and broken, like a radio signal struggling through a storm. A woman's voice, sharp and urgent, "Not safe here. You don't understand. They're watching." Then a man, his voice low and trembling, "We have to shut it down. It's too dangerous." The buzzing noise swelled, drowning out the words, but I caught another phrase before the line went dead. "Not our world." My hands trembled, a cold sweat creeping down my neck. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was just a technical malfunction, some bizarre echo in the system. But the voices persisted, faint and fragmented, like ghosts trapped in the wires. I tapped the microphone, whispering, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response. Just that crackling static and the distant echo of fear. Dr. Kim looked up, startled. "What's going on?" I gestured at the speaker, trying to steady my voice. I don't know. I'm hearing voices on the comm channel." She frowned, pushing her glasses up. "Interference? Maybe a bug in the code. The quantum link's been unstable since last week." I nodded but didn't take my eyes off the monitor. The voices swirled again, overlapping snippets of conversations I couldn't place. There was a faint metallic clang, the sound of hurried footsteps, then a harsh whisper. "They took her. We can't save her." "Who took her?" I murmured, more to myself than to Kim. She shrugged. "Probably some crosstalk from other labs. The government's been running similar experiments in a few locations. Maybe their systems are bleeding into ours." Bleeding. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy with silence like a warning. Later, when the lab was empty and the corridors silent, I stayed behind, headphones clamped over my ears, chasing those fractured voices. The smell of ozone was stronger now, acrid and biting. My fingers hovered over the controls, reluctant to turn them off. I felt like a voyeur peering into places I shouldn't see, listening to desperate pleas that might not be real or might not be meant for me. I closed my eyes and tried to focus. There was a pattern, a rhythm to the voices, as if they were fragments of a conversation playing out in parallel, different versions of the same story, each more twisted than the last. A man yelling, a child crying, a woman screaming. Then silence. Complete silence. When I finally took off the headphones, the room felt emptier somehow, colder. The hum of the machines was just background noise again, but I knew it wasn't going to stop. Not really. Not for me. Walking home, the street lamp flickered again. The damp plaster on the building's wall felt rough under my fingertips. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice, then went quiet. And I wondered, not for the first time, which one was truly my reality and how long it would be before I stopped hearing the others. The next morning, I woke up to the sharp stink of burnt coffee and the faint buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. I rolled out of bed, knees creaking, and shuffled into the kitchen. The coffee machine was still warm, a small comfort. I poured a cup, the bitter aroma filling the cramped space, and leaned against the counter. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, The kind of morning that smells like rain but never delivers. The street lamp from last night flickered faintly through the window, like a weak heartbeat. I knew I couldn't ignore what I'd heard. Not anymore. The experiment wasn't just malfunctioning, it was broadcasting something. Or someone. But who? And why? I grabbed my laptop and settled at the table, the coldwood rough under my fingers. I started reviewing the logs from the quantum communication device, hoping for a clue, a pattern I'd missed. The data was a mess, glitches, static, bursts of noise, but beneath it, I found snippets of encrypted transmissions. Not random at all. Then a message caught my eye. A timestamp I didn't recognize, embedded in a loop of static. We're trapped. They're watching. Don't trust the facility. My breath hitched. Trapped. Watching. My hands trembled as I copied the text into a new file. Was this a distress signal? From whom? Or what? I sat back, rubbing my temples, the caffeine doing little to still the growing tension. I kept thinking about the labs, the parallel versions of my reality, each one darker, more twisted. The idea that somewhere out there, someone was experiencing a nightmare version of my life, maybe even worse, made the room feel colder. I needed help. But who could I trust? The government's been tight-lipped about the experiment. I wasn't even sure if my own team knew what was going on. Then there was Sarah. She was my closest colleague, sharp and steady under pressure. If anyone could make sense of this, it was her. I dialed her number, heart pounding against my ribs. The line clicked. "Hey," she answered, voice cautious but warm. "Sarah." Something's wrong with the experiment," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I heard voices. Fragments. Like someone's trapped in there. There was a pause. Then, "You mean the quantum comms?" "That's impossible. It's just noise, glitches." "No, it's not. I've got transcripts. Strange messages. Like distress calls from other labs. You're sure you're not losing it?" Her tone was teasing but edged with concern. I rubbed my forehead. "I'm serious. I can send you the files." She hesitated. "Okay. Send them. I'll look at it tonight." "Thanks," I said, relief washing over me. I don't know what's happening, but it's not just a malfunction. We hung up, but the knot in my stomach tightened. If Sarah saw what I saw, she'd understand the stakes. But if she didn't, well, I wasn't sure I could keep this to myself. I spent the day combing through the data, cross-referencing timestamps, trying to isolate the source. The patterns emerged slowly, repetitive sequences, like echoes of the same conversation, each distorted, as if filtered through a broken mirror. The voices weren't random. They were layered, overlapping, forming a tangled narrative. And then I found something new. A timestamp matching my own lab's coordinates, but the recording was different. The voice was harsher, more urgent. A man arguing about protocol breaches. A woman warning about security leaks. Something about containment failure. I leaned closer, breath shallow. This wasn't just a message, it was a warning. From my own lab. Or a version of it. The walls seemed to close in. I could almost smell the sterile tang of the lab's chemicals, feel the cold metal of the console beneath my fingers. My phone buzzed again. "Sarah." I answered, voice tight. "Did you see the files?" "Yeah," she said, voice low. "This is bigger than I thought. We need to meet. In person." I agreed immediately. We decided to meet at a quiet cafe near the university. Some were public but dim enough to talk without being overheard. As I left my apartment, the air was thick with humidity, the faint scent of rain mingling with the city's usual grime. The street lamp flickered again, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts over cracked pavement. I pulled my jacket tighter, the dampness seeping through the fabric. At the cafe, Sarah was already there, her expression serious. She slid a USB drive across the table. "I decrypted part of the files," she said. "There's evidence of unauthorized experiments off the books. Parallel tests. They're trying to communicate with other versions of this project." I swallowed hard. "Why?" "Control," she said flatly. "Or containment. But something went wrong. People got hurt. Or worse." Her words hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I glanced out the window, catching sight of a man across the street, his face obscured by a hat pulled low. He paused, looked directly at me for a second too long, then disappeared into the crowd. I shook my head. Paranoia? Maybe. But I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Back at my place, I plugged the USB into my laptop. The files detailed a series of experiments, some ethical, some not. There were mentions of accidents, injuries covered up, even a few disappearances. The parallel labs weren't just testing communication, they were testing limits. Pushing boundaries no one dared to speak of. As I read, a sudden chill crept up my spine. The voices from last night, they weren't hallucinations or technical glitches. They were cries for help. Echoes of real people, trapped in versions of my own reality where things had gone horribly wrong. My phone buzzed again. A message. No number. Just one sentence, "They're closer than you think." I dropped the phone onto the table, heart hammering. The room felt suddenly too small, the shadows too long. Who were they? And how much of this twisted puzzle was already unfolding in my own world? I glanced at the clock. Midnight. The hour when silence usually falls hardest. But now, I was certain of one thing. This was just the beginning. The phone lay face down on the scarred wooden table, its screen faintly glowing like a warning beacon I wasn't ready to heed. The clock ticked past midnight, its relentless rhythm louder in the heavy silence of the room. I could still hear the distant hum of the city, cars passing sporadically, a dog barking somewhere out of sight. But inside, the air felt thick, suffocating. The faint smell of burnt coffee lingered from earlier, mixed with the stale scent of paper and cold metal from my laptop. I rubbed my arms, goosebumps rising despite the warmth of the radiator humming softly against the wall. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of dread. "Okay," I muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "Figure this out. Step by step." It sounded ridiculous, like a mantra for someone slowly unraveling at the edges. But I couldn't stop now. Not after what I'd uncovered. I pulled the laptop closer. The files. The experiments. Names, dates, footage, some corrupted, others crystal clear. The further I delved, the darker the picture became. Parallel labs, yes, but not just experiments. More like prisons. Versions of this world where people weren't just subjects, they were victims. A sudden noise made me jump. The old radiator popped, a sharp crack. My hands trembled as I reached for the mouse, scrolling through the last video I'd opened. It was grainy, shaky footage from a security camera in one of the labs. The timestamp was only a few hours ago, but the faces on screen weren't familiar. Or were they? I squinted, heart thudding against my ribs. There was a man tall, with dark hair, a scar along his jaw. I blinked. It looked like me, but not quite. He was arguing with a woman, her voice low and urgent. "We can't keep hiding this," she said. "They're going to find out. You have to decide." The man shook his head. "You don't get it. If they know, it's over. Not just for us." I leaned in, every nerve on edge. The conversation fractured, static buzzing through the speakers. Then, a sharp cry cut through, the woman screaming, a desperate, broken sound that made my stomach twist. And then silence. I shut the laptop with a snap, breath catching in my throat. This wasn't some distant science fiction nightmare. This was happening. Somewhere. And maybe here, too. I stood, pacing the cramped room, hands running through my hair. What if those labs weren't just parallel? What if they were connected? What if those voices, those cries, were bleeding through because someone or something was forcing it? I glanced out the window. The street was empty, the lampposts casting long, flickering shadows. I noticed the faintest movement near the alley, a figure slipping behind a dumpster. My pulse jumped. Could I be imagining things? Was I losing it? No! Not now! The phone buzzed again, harsh against the quiet. I barely touched it, glancing down. Another message. No number. You can't run. The words hit like a punch. The room seemed to shrink even further. My breath came shallow and fast. I swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline. My phone rang. A sharp, insistent sound. I froze. Caller ID, unknown. I stared at it, hand hovering. Part of me screamed to ignore it, but the other, curiosity or madness, I couldn't say, made me swipe to answer. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Listen carefully," a man's voice said, low and clipped, like a soldier giving orders. "You're in deeper than you realize. The project wasn't just about communication. It's about control. And you've seen too much." I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "Who is this? What are you talking about?" There was a pause, then a sigh, almost tired. "They're watching. Not just the labs. Not just the tests. You. Everyone you care about. There's no going back. You have to decide, stay quiet or fight." The line went dead. I dropped the phone, heart hammering wildly. My legs threatened to give out. Fight? What fight? I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a hero. I was just someone who'd stumbled into something far beyond me. I sank into the chair, head spinning. The files, the voices, the messages, it all pointed to one terrifying truth. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted this exposed, or maybe they wanted it buried forever. And somehow, I was caught in the crossfire. The room felt colder now. I could hear the faintest creak, maybe the building settling, maybe footsteps just beyond the door. My eyes darted to the window again. No one. Just shadows. But shadows can hide a lot. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? "Hello, yes, I'm hearing voices from other realities and someone's threatening me over the phone. They think I was crazy. Or worse, they think I was the problem." I needed proof. Hard evidence. Something undeniable. I pulled the USB from the laptop and stared at it. The key to all this madness. But also, a target on my back. The city outside seemed oblivious to the storm brewing in my little room. Somewhere, someone else was trapped in this nightmare, crying out across the void. And I was the only one who could hear. I had to make a choice. Keep digging and risk everything, or walk away and pretend none of this ever happened. But I knew, deep down, there was no walking away anymore. The moment I plugged in that USB, I crossed a line. No more turning back. A sudden knock at the door made me jump out of my chair. Sharp, deliberate. 3 quick raps. I froze. Who is it? I called, voice shaky but trying to sound firm. No answer. The knocking came again, more urgent. I edged toward the door, every muscle coiled. Peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just dark hallway, empty. But then a shadow flickered at the far end. A shape moving too fast to be sure. I swallowed. Heart in my throat. And then the sharpest, coldest realization hit me. They're already inside. The door handle rattled. I stepped back, fumbling for the USB, my breath shallow and ragged. The point of no return had arrived. And I wasn't ready. The door handle rattled again, slower this time, deliberate. 3 knocks came again, softer now, almost hesitant. A voice whispered from the other side, but the words were muffled, distorted, like they were coming from underwater. I pressed my ear against the door, heart hammering so loud it nearly drowned out the words. Need help, please. I staggered back, the USB slipping from my sweaty grasp to clatter against the floor. The sound echoed, sharp. I crouched quickly, snatched it up, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it again. The voice wasn't mine. Not remotely. A woman's voice, thin, fragile, but laced with a desperate urgency I couldn't ignore. Some part of me screamed to run. But which part? The logical side that knew this whole nightmare began because I poked at something far beyond my understanding? Or the part that wanted to reach through and pull someone out before it was too late? I swallowed hard, the metallic taste of adrenaline coating my tongue. The doorknob turned slowly, an agonizing crawl, like time itself was stretching out. I grabbed the chair behind me, raising it just as the door swung open. A man stood there, thin, pale, eyes sunken and wild. His lab coat was smeared with dirt, or maybe something darker. I couldn't tell in the dim light. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Or years. His voice cracked as he spoke. Please. I'm not your enemy. I didn't lower the chair. Who are you? My voice was rough, hoarse, but steady enough. Name's Dr. Lyle. I worked on the quantum comm project. But not here. Not in your lab. He glanced behind him nervously, as if expecting someone else to appear. In the other facility. Parallel experiments. Things went wrong. Horribly wrong. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. You mean another lab, like a different branch? He shook his head violently. No. Different reality. Different us. Same technology. Different consequences. My stomach lurched. I thought I was the only one hearing those voices. He gave a bitter laugh, like a knife twisting in his gut. You're not. We're all drowning in them. But the damage. A sudden noise cut through the moment, a low, grinding metallic screech followed by a distant crash. Both of us snapped our heads toward the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It came from down the hallway, somewhere beyond the flickering corridor. Not good, Lyle muttered. They're coming. Who? I demanded, stepping back toward the wall. Security. Or worse. In my reality, the project was shut down violently. People disappeared. They wanted to keep the experiments buried. A cold wave of dread hit me, thick and suffocating. The idea that it wasn't just me in danger. That these parallel labs had their own shadows, hunters lurking in the dark. If they crossed over, what then? What would they do to me? Footsteps echoed, heavy and deliberate, approaching fast. I pressed myself against the rough plaster, the coarse texture scratching my bare arm. The coppery tang of blood was faint but unmistakable in the air. Somewhere, a light flickered again, dimmer this time, as if struggling to stay awake. "Listen," Lyle whispered urgently, "there's a safe room down the hall. Emergency lock." "We can't." Before he finished, the door at the far end slammed open, and two figures burst in, faces hidden behind dark masks. They moved with cold precision, weapons raised. My heart seized in my chest. Instinct took over. I yanked Lyle toward the stairs, ignoring the sharp sting in my shin as I tripped over a loose tile. We ran, breath ragged, the sounds of pursuit crashing behind us like a tidal wave. The stale air tasted sour, thick with dust and fear. My shoes scraped the concrete steps, echoing in the narrow stairwell. "Left," Lyle hissed, pushing me through a heavy steel door. The lock clicked shut behind us. Inside, the room was small, windowless, lit by a single red emergency light that bathed everything in a sinister glow. The air was cooler here, but stale, like it hadn't circulated in days. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Lyle crouched beside a control panel, fingers flying over buttons with a frantic desperation. "We need to send a distress signal. To your reality. To anyone listening." I watched him, trying to process. The lines between what was real and what wasn't had blurred so much, I wasn't sure if I could trust my own eyes anymore. The voices, the signals, they weren't just random. They were cries for help. From versions of myself trapped in hellish versions of this experiment. And now, one of those hells had found me. The panel beeped, a low, persistent tone. "Signal sent," Lyle said. "But it's a Hail Mary. They might not get it in time." I nodded, swallowing the lump of dread rising in my throat. The pounding at the door started again, urgent, relentless. Whoever they weren't waiting. "Any ideas?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Lyle's eyes were wild, haunted. "I don't know if this is your reality or theirs. I don't even know if I'm still me. But if we want to survive, we have to fight." He pulled a small device from his pocket, a stun baton, humming faintly with electricity. I felt the cold metal in my hand, heavy and real, and for a moment, a flicker of something like hope sparked inside me. Then the door shuddered violently. They were coming in. "Ready?" Lyle said, voice low. I nodded. Because running was no longer an option. Because I had already crossed the line. And because the nightmare was far from over. The door burst open. And I met the eyes of a man I didn't recognize, eyes cold, calculating, and utterly merciless. "Dr. Harris," he said, voice calm but lethal. "You're coming with us." The door slammed shut behind us, the heavy thunk reverberating through the narrow corridor like a gunshot. Lyle's grip on my wrist was surprisingly firm, almost protective. I looked at him, searching for the wildness, the fear, the chaos I'd seen earlier. But there was something else now. Something resolved. "We're not going anywhere," Lyle said, voice low but steady. "Not without answers." The man's lip twitched, like he was about to laugh but decided against it. "Your answers endangered national security. You don't get to decide." His hand dipped inside his jacket, a subtle movement that made my stomach knot. I stepped forward, feeling the chill of the cold metal still pressed against my palm, the stun baton. The hallway smelled of stale cigarette smoke mixed with the acrid tang of cleaning solvent. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, jittery shadows that danced on the cracked linoleum tiles. Somewhere far off, a distant dog barked, sharp and anxious, breaking the heavy silence. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "You don't understand what this is," I said, voice hoarse. "There's more than one reality out there. The experiment." "Enough," the man interrupted. His eyes flicked to Lyle, then back to me. "You're done meddling." The stunned baton hummed faintly, an electric whisper. Lyle's fingers tightened around mine. I could taste the metallic tang of old blood, or was that just panic, on the back of my tongue. Suddenly, without warning, Lyle swung the baton in a wide arc. The man dove to the side just in time, but the stunned baton cracked through the air, cold and heavy with silence, sparking as it connected with the wall. A sharp, high-pitched whine filled the corridor. "Run!" Lyle hissed, pulling me toward the stairwell. We sprinted down the steps, 2 at a time. The sound of boots pounding behind us, heavy and relentless, grew louder with every heartbeat. The stale air in the stairwell thickened, damp and cold, smelling faintly of mildew and rust. My chest burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't dare slow down. We burst through the emergency exit onto the cracked pavement outside. The night was bitter, the wind slicing through my thin jacket like icy knives. A street lamp flickered nearby, its light struggling against the darkness. Somewhere, a car alarm began to wail, a shrill, desperate sound that made my head swim. Lyle pulled out his phone. "Signal's weak." He cursed under his breath. "We need to get somewhere safe." "I know a place." I nodded, not trusting my voice. My hands trembled as I pulled my jacket tighter around me. The cold seeped into my bones, but the adrenaline kept me moving. The man's words echoed in my mind, "You don't get to decide." Did I, though? Had I ever? We moved quickly through the deserted streets, shadows pressing close. Every so often, I caught fragments of static-filled voices, snatches of conversations, distress calls from labs that weren't mine, from people who looked like me but weren't. Some whispered warnings. Others screamed for help. And always, beneath it all, that nagging question, which one was real? Which one belonged to me? Lyle led me to a small, nondescript apartment building tucked between a boarded-up bookstore and a shuttered cafe. The faded brick was rough under my fingertips as we climbed the narrow staircase. Inside, the air smelled of damp carpet and old paper. A faint hum of a heater filled the room, a small comfort against the cold outside. We sat on the threadbare couch, the fabric rough against my skin. Lyle pulled out a battered laptop, the screen cracked but still functional. "I hacked into their system," he said, eyes scanning lines of code. "There's a loop like a feedback from other labs. It's why you're hearing those voices. But it's unstable. If they trace it back, they'll find us." I pressed my palms to my face, the rough skin grounding me. "I don't know what I am anymore," I whispered. "One moment I'm me, then." "Parallel versions," Lyle interrupted gently. "Each one darker, more broken. But you're the one who made it here. You're the one who chose to fight." I wanted to believe him. I needed to. But the terror lingered, a shadow at the edge of my mind, twisting the edges of every thought. Outside, the city breathed a distant siren, the scrape of tires on wet asphalt, the faint smell of rain yet to fall. Inside, the quiet was absolute except for the tapping of keys and our ragged breathing. Hours passed. I stared at the screen, watching the data flicker. The voices came again, fragments more urgent now. "Help me, please. Wrong experiment. They know." I closed my eyes. The weight of it all pressed down, suffocating. Then, a single thought cut through the noise. I had to choose. To accept this fractured existence or to find a way back. Lyle looked up. There's a way to shut it down. Permanently. But it means cutting off all communication. No more signals. No more echoes. I swallowed hard. And me? You'd lose the connection, yes. But you'd be free from the interference. From the voices. Freedom. The word tasted strange, almost foreign. Could silence be a kind of peace? I nodded slowly. Do it. He hesitated, then began typing furiously. The laptop's glow painted his face in pale light, sweat beading at his temples. Are you sure? He asked quietly. I have to be, I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. I can't live in the noise anymore. The program ran, the screen filling with progress bars and warnings. Outside, the city murmured, unaware of the battle unfolding in a forgotten corner. Then, silence. Complete silence. No voices. No static. Just the quiet hum of the heater and the faint rustle of the night breeze. I exhaled, the breath coming out in a long, shaky rush. My hands unclenched, resting on my knees. Lyle looked at me, relief softening his features. You're back. But was I? The question lingered, unspoken, heavy in the air. We stayed there, side by side, letting the silence stretch between us. The nightmare hadn't vanished, not really. It had changed shape. I touched my face, feeling the rough stubble, the faint lines etched by sleepless nights. This was me, or at least, this version of me. And for now, that had to be enough. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, cold and steady against the window pane. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm, the simple, human sound of water meeting earth. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. Story 4, Mirror Lives, haunting messages from strangers. I never liked mornings, not really. I stood by the window of my apartment, fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the street below. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of rain, and the buildings looked a little too still, a little too clean. I ran a hand through my hair, the strands rough and sticky from last night's sweat. Sleep had been shallow, broken by dreams I couldn't quite grasp, faces I couldn't place but which hovered at the edge of my mind like half-remembered names. I shook my head, trying to shove the feeling away. Probably just the stress getting to me again. I lived alone in a tiny studio on the third floor of a crumbling building near the edge of downtown, a place where the plaster peeled off the walls in long strips, and the radiator clanked like an old man coughing. The smell was always the same, a faint mixture of mildew, stale cigarettes, and something else I couldn't identify. That morning, the air felt thicker, almost suffocating. I caught a whiff of something metallic, like blood, but there was no blood in sight. It was probably nothing. It had to be. The apartment was cluttered with books and papers, mostly old case files and psychology journals. I worked as a freelance researcher, investigating cold cases, writing articles for obscure magazines. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent and kept me distracted. Distraction was good. It kept the darker thoughts at bay. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter smell filling the kitchen, and sat at the battered wooden table. The chair creaked under me. Outside, a dog barked somewhere far away. A woman's laugh floated up from the street, sharp and sudden, then cut off. I sipped the coffee. Too hot. I blew gently, watching the steam curl into the air. That was when the first odd thing happened. My phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't recognize. The screen lit up my dark kitchen in a blue glow. I frowned and unlocked it. "Do you remember when we met?" the message read. I stared at it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. The message was simple, but the words twisted inside me like a slow knot tightening in the pit of my stomach. I didn't know who had sent it. No name, no introduction. Just that question. I typed back, "Who's this?" No reply. I put the phone down and leaned back in my chair, the wood scraping against the floor. The room felt colder now, though the radiator was on. The window rattled slightly with the wind. Outside, a man in a black coat passed by, his face obscured by a hat pulled low. He didn't look up. It was the kind of thing you barely notice until it stops happening, the absence of eye contact, the way strangers become ghosts walking past you without acknowledgement. I tried to shake off the unease. Maybe it was some prank. Or a wrong number. I told myself that, but the doubt lingered. How often did you get messages from strangers asking if you remembered meeting them? And what if I did? What if I couldn't remember, but I should? Later that afternoon, I found myself at a local coffee shop, the kind with exposed brick walls and a faint smell of cinnamon and burnt sugar. The barista, a young woman with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, handed me my order with a nod. I sat near the window, my laptop open but ignored. The chatter around me was a dull roar, cups clinking, keyboards clicking, voices rising and falling like waves. That's when I saw him. He was sitting at a table across the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, alone, reading a book. He looked up briefly, catching my gaze, and then looked away. There was something familiar about him. Not his face exactly, it was ordinary, unremarkable, but the way he held the book, the tense set of his shoulders, the flicker of something wary in his eyes. I got the sudden, inexplicable urge to stand up and talk to him. To ask if we'd met before. I didn't. Instead, I watched him for a while. He pulled out a notebook, scribbled something quickly, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. The light from the window caught the edge of a silver ring on his finger. It gleamed like a warning. I left the coffee shop feeling colder than when I'd arrived. The sky outside had darkened, an unspoken thunder rolling somewhere far off. The city seemed quieter now, like it was holding secrets in its breathless silence. That night, the unease settled deep in my chest. I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the radiator and the occasional creak of the building settling. Shadows shifted on the ceiling, stretching and twisting in the dim light of my bedside lamp. I kept thinking about the message. The stranger in the coffee shop. The feeling that something was wrong, but I didn't know what. Sleep finally came as a thin veil, fragile and fleeting. The next morning, I woke to another message. Same number. We all remember. Even you. My hands trembled as I read it. The coffee I made tasted bitter and metallic. Something had begun. Something I couldn't explain. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that I wasn't the only one. I tried to shake off the unease, but shadows clung to every corner of my day, whispering secrets I couldn't yet hear. The next morning, the city was gray and damp, the kind of morning where even the air feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. I sat up, the mattress creaking beneath me, and rubbed my face. The bitter taste of coffee lingered on my tongue, metallic and sharp, like I'd swallowed a penny. I didn't remember adding anything to it, but then again, memory had become slippery lately. I could hardly trust my own mind. I glanced at the clock, 8:17 a.m., and decided I had to do something. Sitting here, spiraling into paranoia, wasn't going to make any of this clearer. I grabbed my coat and phone, the worn fabric rough against my palms, and headed out into the damp morning. The street smelled like wet asphalt and something faintly sour, trash left out too long, maybe. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp and urgent. The city was waking up, but there was a strange quiet underneath the usual noise. Like the world was holding back, waiting for something. I needed to find the others. The strangers from the coffee shop who'd shared my story, my memories, down to the smallest detail. Names, places, even the way I like my eggs in the morning, every one of them matched. It was impossible. And yet, there they were, all connected by this bizarre, invisible thread. I started with the woman who'd introduced herself as Rachel. We'd exchanged numbers before parting ways, though I wasn't sure why I'd agreed. Something about her made me both wary and desperate for answers. I tapped out a quick message. "Can we meet? I think we need to talk." No reply. Not yet. I moved on, wandering toward the park where the third stranger had said they liked to sit in the mornings. The air was colder here, the wet leaves sticking to my shoes. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, or maybe I was watching myself from a distance, caught in a loop I didn't understand. Then my phone buzzed. "Rachel, meet me at the library." Quiet. Noon. I glanced at the clock again. 2 hours. Not much time, but enough to think. Or to spiral further. The library was an old brick building, smelling of dust and forgotten words. The kind of place where time seemed to slow down, and secrets got buried beneath layers of silence. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner with a notebook open on the table. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the pages as if she was hunting for something. "You're late," she said, closing the notebook quickly. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I had to think," I replied, sliding into the seat opposite her. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet. She nodded, folding her hands. "Me too. I've been digging. There's more of us than you think." I raised an eyebrow. "More?" "Yeah. People whose memories don't add up. Who remember the same things, the same events. Down to the smallest detail." She paused, biting her lip. "I found a forum. Private, invitation only. People sharing stories, trying to make sense of it all." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. A forum. That meant this wasn't just a random glitch or coincidence. This was something bigger. "Who runs it?" I asked. "That's the thing. No one knows. It's all anonymous. But the posts are detailed. People describing experiments, memory tests, strange encounters with people who shouldn't exist." I swallowed hard. The word experiment hit me like a punch. Could this really be some kind of psychological manipulation? Were we all subjects in a cruel game? Rachel's eyes darted around the room, as if expecting someone to overhear. "I think it's a covert study. Maybe government, maybe private. But it's invasive. They're erasing and rewriting memories, identities. And it's happening without consent." I rubbed my temples, the rough skin stinging under my fingers. "But why? What's the goal?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Control? Testing limits? Whatever it is, it's dangerous." Our conversation was interrupted by a sudden loud bang from the hallway, a door slamming shut somewhere down the corridor. Both of us jumped. The library's silence shattered like glass. I glanced at Rachel, whose face had gone pale. "You think they're watching us?" "Maybe," she whispered. "Or maybe it's just paranoia. But I don't want to take that chance." We agreed to keep meeting, to pull what little information we could find. But as I left the library, the sky outside had thickened with clouds, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, cold and insistent against my face. Walking home, I passed the same coffee shop where it had all started. The sign flickered weakly, the neon buzzing low and uneven. Inside, the barista looked up and gave me a quick, knowing glance before returning to his work. I swallowed hard. Back in my apartment, the shadows seemed to have multiplied. The walls felt closer, the silence louder. I sat at my desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to write down everything we talked about. But the words felt hollow, like they were slipping through my grasp. Then my phone buzzed again. A new message. From a number I didn't recognize. Look closer. They want you alone. My hands went ice cold. The bitter taste of coffee returned, stronger this time, as if the message had seeped into my skin. Alone. That word echoed in my mind, louder than any noise outside. I wasn't sure what was worse, the idea that someone was orchestrating this nightmare, or the fear that I was already trapped inside it, like a fly caught in a spider's web, struggling to remember who I was before all this began. Somewhere in the city, I thought, other faces were looking back at me through the fog. Faces that should be strangers, but weren't. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the next step would bring me closer to the truth or deeper into whatever darkness was pulling us all under. I needed to find them. All of them. Before it was too late. The night dragged on, thick and heavy like a smoke that clings to your clothes long after the fire's gone out. Alone. The word hovered in the air, a ghost that wouldn't let me breathe. I turned away from the screen, rubbing my eyes until the edges blurred. The coffee I'd spilled earlier had dried into a bitter crust on my fingertips, its scent faint but stubborn, like the memory I couldn't quite shake. I needed answers. More than that, I needed to know what I was stepping into. Because the deeper I dug, the more it felt like the ground beneath me was cracking, ready to swallow me whole. I called Anna again. She was the first person out of the group who hadn't sounded like a broken record, the one who'd admitted she was scared but still willing to talk. Her voice was shaky when she answered, almost a whisper. "They're watching us," she said. I found a file on my laptop. It's all of us. Every detail, every meeting, every word. It's like they've been tracking us for months, maybe years. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. What do you mean they? Who's behind this? I don't know. But it's not just us. There's a list, a whole network of people with the same stories, the same memories. It's like we're all copies. Or experiments. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Experiments. Psychological manipulation. The idea that someone had been rewriting parts of our lives, implanting memories, orchestrating encounters, it wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was real. I ran my hands through my hair, the strands feeling damp with sweat despite the cold air. My phone buzzed again, but this time I didn't look. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, the night air sharp and biting against my skin. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked, a single, lonely sound that echoed off the brick walls. I walked without a plan, the city's usual buzz muted in the early morning hours. Every shadow seemed to flicker with movement, every passerby a potential observer. I kept my phone in my pocket, its screen dark and silent. The message had said they want you alone, but who were they? And why me? Back at my apartment, the silence was deafening. I checked the locks twice, the cold metal biting into my palms. My thoughts raced, circling back to the faces I'd met, the strangers with identical histories, the shared memories that didn't add up. Could any of it have been real? Or were we all just pieces in some cruel game? I needed to find the others. All of them. But where? And how? Then the screen on my laptop lit up. An email. No subject. No sender. Just a single attachment, a video file. My fingers trembled as I clicked it open. The footage was grainy, shot from a fixed camera somewhere, sterile and cold, white walls, fluorescent lights, the faint hum of an air conditioner. In the center of the frame sat a man. His face was blurred, but his voice was clear. "Remember," he said, his tone clinical and cold. "You are part of something greater. Your memories are not your own, but tools for progress. Resistance is futile." The screen flickered, and the video cut to black. I slammed the laptop shut, the sudden silence pressing down on me like a weight. My chest tightened, breath shallow and uneven. This wasn't just about shared memories anymore. It was about control. About erasing who I was, and replacing it with their design. I thought about walking away. About pretending none of this had touched me. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew it was impossible. The trap had snapped shut. I was inside, tangled in wires and shadows, and the only way out was through. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. I stared at the screen, unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Good," a voice said, low and steady. "You're ready." The line went dead. My hand shook as I dropped the phone onto the table. The room felt colder, darker somehow, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the unraveling of a life or many lives right inside its heart. I was no longer just a witness to this nightmare. I was a participant. Trapped in a game with no rules I understood and no exit I could see. And somewhere in the quiet, the words repeated again, louder than before. Alone. 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 But I wasn't going to be alone for long. Not if I could help it. The knock at the door was soft, almost hesitant, but it shattered the silence like a gunshot. I held my breath, heart hammering against my ribs. For a moment, I debated whether to answer, or let whoever it was fade away into the shadows outside. But the loneliness clawed at me, whispering promises of connection, of something, anything other than this suffocating void. I rose, every step heavy with doubt, and cracked the door open. A figure stood there, drenched in the cold night, face obscured by the brim of a hat pulled low. Their eyes met mine, sharp, searching, familiar in a way I couldn't place. "You're not alone," the voice said, low and steady. "Not anymore." Relief and suspicion warred inside me, but I stepped aside. Whatever this was, it was the first thread of light in a room swallowed by darkness. Together, maybe we could find a way out of the maze. Maybe the game had just begun. The door clicked shut behind me like a trap snapping shut. "Who are you?" I asked, voice rough, barely above a whisper. The person hesitated, then pulled the hat back just enough to reveal a pale face, eyes too sharp for comfort. "We don't have time for introductions," they said, voice low but urgent. "Not now. You've been asking questions. Questions you shouldn't." I blinked. The words settled coldly in my chest. "I'm not sure what you mean." They took a step closer, and the air between us thickened. "You've been poking around, digging into memories that aren't yours. It's dangerous. You don't know what you're playing with." I swallowed hard. My mind raced, recalling every strange conversation, every shared detail that had felt like a cracked mirror reflecting my own life back at me, twisted, fractured, wrong. The faces, the stories, the timelines that lined up too well. Something was off. Something was deeply wrong. "Who else knows?" I asked, voice still shaky. "Who's behind this?" No answer. Instead, the figure reached into their pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. "Read this." Then decide if you want to keep digging or if you want to vanish like the rest. I took it, fingers brushing against cold paper. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, precise. A list of names, dates, locations, all tied to me, to them, to others I'd never met but somehow knew. My heart hammered louder, a drumbeat signaling danger. The list ended with a single phrase, typed in bold: "We control the past to own the future." I looked up, to find the figure already moving toward the door. "Wait," I said. "What does that even mean? Who are you?" They paused, hand on the doorknob, voice barely audible. "It means you're not who you think you are. And neither am I." Then the door shut with a soft click. Silence. Complete silence. I sank back against the wall, the paper crumpling in my hand. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear, the edges of reality fraying. Who else was involved? Who had taken pieces of our lives and twisted them together like some grotesque patchwork? I spent the next hours combing through the list, cross-referencing names and dates with every scrap of memory I had. Each entry was a thread, pulling me deeper into a web I didn't want to see but couldn't look away from. The smell of stale coffee and burnt toast filled the small kitchen as dawn crept in, pale and hesitant. Then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Just one word: stop. I stared at it, fingers numb. The screen's cold glow mocked me. Stop? How could I? They had already stolen so much. My memories, my identity, maybe even my future. I needed answers. And if that meant venturing into the darkest corners of this twisted game, so be it. The next day, I met with Lila, the woman I'd first encountered with that impossible shared past. She looked exhausted, eyes shadowed but burning with the same desperate need I recognized in myself. "They're watching," she said immediately, no preamble. "Every move we make, every word we say. It's like we're trapped in a glass box." I nodded, the rough plaster of the cafe wall pressing against my back. The air smelled faintly of burnt sugar and old books. I could hear the clatter of cups, the low murmur of other patrons, but my focus was razor sharp. "Have you found anything new?" I asked. She shook her head. "Only more questions. But yesterday, I saw someone I thought was gone. He looked right through me, like I was a ghost." My throat tightened. "You mean a twin? Like the others?" She hesitated, voice barely steady. "Yes. And he wasn't alone." The idea of doubles, copies, or worse, was no longer abstract. It had teeth. It had a face. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the street outside. The cafe window rattled. People turned, startled. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. The tension in the room snapped taut. Lila's eyes darted to the door. "They're here." I was out of my seat before I could think, heart slamming against my ribs like a frantic prisoner. We slipped out the back door into the narrow alley, the smell of damp bricks and rotting leaves filling my lungs. Footsteps thundered behind us, heavy and unrelenting. "Split up," Lila hissed. "Meet at the old warehouse on 5th. 1 hour." I hesitated, but she was already disappearing around the corner. My legs moved without permission, slapping against cracked pavement as I navigated the maze of alleys I thought I knew. But tonight, everything was unfamiliar, distorted. My breath came in ragged bursts. The sharp tang of fear settled low in my stomach, cold and persistent. I could hear them, voices, footsteps closing in. I ducked into a shadowed doorway, chest heaving. The rough stone pressed against my back, cold and unforgiving. My hands searched my pockets for anything useful, a key, a knife, my phone. Nothing but a crumpled receipt and a lighter. A voice cut through the darkness, sharp and clipped. You shouldn't be out here. I barely had time to twist away before a heavy hand gripped my wrist, fingers digging in like iron claws. Panic exploded inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think. The man's breath was hot against my neck, smelling of cigarettes and stale beer. Who sent you? I demanded, voice shaking but loud. He laughed, a low, cruel sound. Nobody sends me. I'm here because you're a problem. You and your little group, stirring up dust where it shouldn't be. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. What do you want? To make you stop. Permanently. The words hit me like a punch. I jerked my arm free and stumbled back, the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. I could taste copper, maybe from a bite on my lip. The night seemed to close in tighter, the shadows leering closer. I ran, no plan, just a desperate need to escape. The city was a blur of cold streetlights and damp pavement beneath my pounding feet. Somewhere far ahead, a dog barked, sharp and urgent. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. I could hear footsteps again, but they were fading. When I finally slowed, panting against a chain-link fence, the world seemed impossibly still. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper from earlier. The phrase echoed again in my mind, we control the past to own the future. If they were willing to hurt, to threaten, to silence me, what else could they do? How deep did this go? And most terrifying of all, was I already too far gone to turn back? The answer was never simple. But I knew one thing for certain, they hadn't won yet. I had to keep fighting, even if it meant losing myself in the process. The rain started just as I was locking the door behind me, a relentless tapping against the cracked window pane that made the room feel smaller, more suffocating. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the damp, metallic scent of wet concrete mingled with the faint trace of burnt coffee from the street cafe below. The chill crept under my thin jacket, making the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had to. I'd spent the last week chasing shadows, trying to piece together the tangled web of identical stories that tied me to those strangers. Identical down to the smallest detail, birthdays, childhood memories, favorite books, even the way we all described that one summer's day in 1997 like it was etched into our minds. It was impossible, but it was real. And now, I believed it wasn't just a coincidence. I had to face them again, the others. Not because I trusted them, but because they were the only link to what had been done to us. Or maybe to what we'd done to ourselves without realizing it. My hands trembled as I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the message. It was from Lena, the woman who first told me about the experiment. A time and place. No explanation. Just the cold, stark command of an appointment. I hesitated only a second before stepping into the rain, letting the cold drops soak through my clothes, the rough plaster of the building's exterior scratching against my palms as I gripped the railing. My breath puffed out in uneven clouds. The cafe where we were meeting was a small, dim place tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore that smelled of old paper and dust. The light inside flickered irregularly, the hum of the old neon sign outside mingling with the low murmur of a barista's voice. It was almost comforting, in a strange way, to be surrounded by something so mundane after the last few weeks' chaos. Lena was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her fingers wrapped tightly around a chipped ceramic mug. Her eyes caught mine, and she gave a nod that didn't quite reach her lips. I slid in opposite her, the vinyl seat sticking slightly to my damp jacket. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice low, almost drowned out by the clatter of cups and the distant rumble of traffic. We don't have much time. I glanced around. No one else was here yet. The others would join us soon, she said. We need to talk about what happened, she continued. About the memories, how they were manipulated. You're not imagining this. I swallowed hard. But why? Who would do this to us? She shook her head. It's not that simple. It's bigger than us, bigger than any of the individuals involved. It's a psychological experiment, yes, but also a test of control, identity. They, whoever they are, wanted to see if they could rewrite our sense of self. Implant memories, erase others. Create duplicates, in a way. Duplicates, I repeated, the word feeling strange on my tongue, as if it belonged to someone else. Lena leaned in, lowering her voice. We're all part of a group. Different people, but with the same core memories. They wanted to see how far they could push the boundaries of identity. And if we'd realize it was happening. A shiver ran down my spine, though the cafe was warm. I rubbed my arms, the fabric rough and scratchy beneath my fingertips. But how? How can memories be manipulated like that? It's not like they can just erase my past and replace it with someone else's. She sighed. They found ways. Drugs, hypnosis, constant repetition. Isolation. We were kept apart but fed the same narratives. The same stories, over and over. Slowly, the lines blurred until we couldn't tell our own lives from the others. It's why you met the others, the ones with matching stories. The sound of the door opening made us both look up. 3 figures stepped inside, damp from the rain, faces drawn but familiar. James, the quiet man with the haunted eyes. Claire, whose laugh didn't quite reach her smile. And Marcus, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. They settled quietly, the weight of shared secrets hanging thick between us. No greetings, no small talk. Just a tense understanding. I met James's eyes. So, what now? I asked, voice rough. He exhaled slowly, fingers tapping the table. We exposed them. Whoever's behind this needs to be stopped. We can't let them keep playing with people's lives. But how? Claire's voice was barely a whisper. They're everywhere. Hidden. Watching. Marcus shook his head. We need proof. Names, places, anything. Without that, it's just paranoia. Lena pulled out a folder, the paper crinkling softly. I've been collecting what I could. Documents, recordings from some of the tests, even names of supposed researchers. It's not much, but it's a start. We spent hours going over what little evidence we had, piecing together the fragments of our stolen pasts. Each revelation was a knife twisting deeper. The realization that we were pawns in a cruel game made my stomach churn. And yet, beneath the fear and anger, something else stirred, a flicker of resolve. I looked around at these strangers who had become something like allies, even friends. We were broken, yes, but not defeated. When the cafe finally emptied and the rain slowed to a drizzle, I stepped outside with them, the night air cool and sharp. My jacket was soaked through, clinging to my skin, but I didn't care. The city around us felt different now, less threatening, somehow, as if the truth had peeled back a layer of darkness. James lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face before the smoke curled into the night. We may never get all the answers, he said quietly. But at least now, we know. And that means something. I nodded, the rough texture of the brick wall beneath my fingers grounding me. Yeah, it does. We walked away from the cafe, the sound of our footsteps swallowed by the soft patter of rain. For the first time in weeks, the weight of uncertainty felt a little lighter. I wasn't the same person who'd started this journey. I was someone else now, someone who had been broken and put back together in pieces that didn't quite fit, but still formed a whole. The night stretched out before us, vast and unknowable, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Not completely. Because whatever had been done to us, whatever they tried to erase or rewrite, we'd found each other. And together, we could face whatever came next. Silence. Complete silence. Then, finally, a small, bitter smile. We were still here. We had survived. And that was enough. Story 5, elevator to the other floor, trapped between realities. The elevator smelled like burnt plastic and stale air, a mix so sharp it made my nostrils twitch. I shouldn't have taken that elevator. Not then. But I was tired. I wanted to get home and shut the day away, the way I always did after long hours scribbling notes in my cramped apartment. My fingers still smelled of ink and paper dust, and my throat was raw from talking to the phone all afternoon. I wanted nothing more than to sink into my couch, maybe listen to some music, anything to drown out the quiet. The door slid almost grudgingly closed, and the elevator began its descent with a slow jerk that made my stomach lurch. The dim overhead light buzzed, flickering in uneven pulses, casting long shadows along the scratched metal walls. I glanced at the floor indicator, watching the numbers blink from 6, 5, 4, but then it skipped. 3, the light flickered, but the elevator didn't stop. I frowned, pressing the button again. Nothing. No ding, no creak of doors sliding open. Just a low, mechanical groan and that sharp smell gnawing at my throat. The air was thick, stale, and unnervingly warm. I wiped a bead of sweat off my forehead. Late nights were never this uncomfortable. The elevator usually hummed smoothly, a silent promise of safety in a building that had seen better days. Great, I muttered to myself, my voice sounding oddly hollow inside the cramped metal box. Just what I needed. The elevator shuddered again, a harsh vibration running through the floor that made my toes tingle. The numbers blinked erratically, 2, then 1, then 0, but the door stayed shut. I pressed the emergency button, holding it down until my palm went numb. Nothing. No crackling voice, no click of a response. Just silence. Complete silence. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The fluorescent light buzzed low, a high-pitched whine that grated at my nerves. The air smelled sour now, like old sweat mixed with something metallic. Maybe the wiring was fried, or the ventilation dead. The idea of being stuck in here suddenly felt less like a minor inconvenience and more like a slow trap. I tried the door open button, hopeless. The doors didn't budge. I shifted my weight, trying not to imagine what it would be like to be trapped here overnight, alone with nothing but the scratch of my own breath and the faint, distant echo of the city's nightlife. Then came the sound. A faint tap. 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 My skin prickled, and I froze. It was coming from the other side of the door, sharp and deliberate, like someone or something was knocking. My pulse thudded against my ribs, uneven and loud. I told myself it had to be a maintenance worker, some late-night janitor. But when I pressed my ear against the cold metal, the sound didn't repeat. Just silence. No voices. No footsteps. I stepped back, heart hammering. The elevator shuddered again, and the floor indicator blinked once more, this time showing 3. The doors cracked open a fraction, just enough for a sliver of dim light to spill in, light that definitely wasn't from the lobby. It was colder out there, the air, cold and heavy with silence sharp and biting, smelling faintly of damp concrete and something else I couldn't place. A low murmur, like distant voices, drifted in. Indistinct. Far away. I hesitated, one hand still on the door edge, the other clutching my bag, "Hello?" I called softly, voice barely above a whisper. No answer. The door edged closed again with a reluctant sigh. I sat down on the floor, my back pressed against the wall, knees drawn up. The elevator flickered off for a moment, then back on, the numbers glitching wildly. 4, 5, 2, 3. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I tried to steady my breathing, but the air was growing colder, biting at my skin through my shirt. My hands trembled, and I rubbed them together to chase away the chill. I could taste copper on my tongue, dry and metallic. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Buildings didn't just shift floors at random. Elevators didn't open to empty floors with strange smells and voices. Or did they? I told myself I was imagining things. My senses tricking me, spun tight from exhaustion and too many hours spent alone in the dark. I hadn't seen anyone in hours. Maybe it was the silence playing tricks, or that old news story about the apartments where people vanished, forgotten, swallowed whole by the city. I'd scoffed at it then, but in this moment, the stories felt too close. A sudden thud made me jump. Something heavy, knocking against the elevator shaft wall. Then another. And another. Deliberate. Slow. Like footsteps pacing just beyond my reach. "Who's there?" I called out, voice cracking. The light flickered again. Then a whisper. Barely audible. A name. My name. I pressed myself harder against the wall, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst free. The elevator groaned, slipping downward again. The numbers flipped back to 4. The doors opened wider this time, spilling an entire floor into view, except it wasn't the lobby. Not by a long shot. The hall stretched out in front of me, long and narrow, walls peeling paint and stained with age, the faint smell of rot and something sharp, like bleach and blood. A flickering fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting long, dancing shadows. The silence was thick but broken by distant, uneven footsteps echoing down the corridor. I blinked. This wasn't the building I'd entered. My breath caught, the cold air biting through my jacket. Something was wrong here. I could feel it in my bones. I took a step forward, then another, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. And that's when I realized the door wasn't supposed to open here. It shouldn't have opened at all. Behind me, the elevator doors slid shut with a finality that made me jump. I was no longer between floors. I was somewhere else entirely. The corridor stretched ahead, empty, but I knew it wasn't. Somewhere out there, someone or something was waiting. Waiting to fill the space left by those who'd vanished before me. I swallowed hard and forced my legs forward. Because standing still wasn't an option anymore. The stale air hit me again, heavier this time, as if the corridor was closing in. I took a hesitant step forward, the soles of my boots scraping against rough plaster dust and the gritty remnants of broken glass. My fingers curled tighter around the strap of my bag, knuckles whitening. The elevator doors were sealed shut behind me. No way back. Not yet. I reminded myself to breathe. In. Out. The old building creaked, the distant footsteps from before now closer, but slower, deliberate, scraping against the cracked linoleum in a way that didn't seem accidental. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't just passing by. I swallowed hard. The silence was thick, but it wasn't empty. I could feel eyes on me. Not watching from a distance, but lurking, waiting to pounce. I glanced down the hallway, shadows pooling in the corners like spilled ink. Doors lined the walls, each one chipped, scuffed, some hanging open just a crack, revealing darkness inside. My heart hammered against my ribs, louder and louder, echoing back at me. The thought struck me, this floor, this place, it wasn't random. Every detail was deliberate. I crouched down, peering through a narrow gap in one door. The room beyond was small, cramped, like a storage closet, but what caught my eye was the scattering of old photographs pinned to the wall. Faces, dozens of them, yellowed and curling at the edges. Some were smiling, others blank, expressionless. Names scrawled beneath a few in faded ink: Maggie, Jared, Luis. Missing persons, I assumed. Or maybe something worse. How had these ended up here? Why? I pulled back quickly, breath hitching. My fingers trembled. I needed to keep moving. But the corridor stretched endlessly in either direction, a maze with no exit. Suddenly, a faint sound reached me, a low murmur, like whispered voices, barely audible over the hum of the old fluorescent light. I pressed my ear against the wall. Words tangled and broken, fragments of conversation from someone just beyond hearing. Not safe, not yet, they're watching. I jerked back, heart racing. Who was talking? Were they close? I swallowed dryly. No way to tell. I forced my feet to move, stepping toward the end of the hallway. The floor beneath was cold and uneven, patches of linoleum curling up like peeling skin. Ahead, a door stood ajar, light spilling into the gloom. I reached out, running my fingers along the chipped wood. The scent hit me again, something sharp and chemical, like ammonia mixed with blood. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. Inside was a small office, dust motes swirling in the beam of light from a single desk lamp. Papers were strewn everywhere, some torn, others stained with dark splotches that I didn't want to identify. A corkboard on the far wall was pinned with maps, notes, and photographs, the same faces I'd seen in the closet, but now connected by red string. Lines crisscrossed, linking names, dates, places. I stepped closer, scanning the details. There was a pattern, a timeline, disappearances clustered around this building, this floor, this exact corridor. Dates spanning years, always late at night. Always when the elevator was in use. My breath caught. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone had been tracking this. Someone had tried to make sense of it all. I rifled through the papers, fingers shaking. One note stood out, scribbled in hurried handwriting. Don't trust the staff. They're involved. Watch the cameras. They watch you. Cameras? I'd seen none. But the thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. If they were watching, then I was already trapped in a web I couldn't see. A sudden noise, a sharp click, made me spin around. The door slammed shut behind me. My hand slapped against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. Panic prickled at the edges of my mind. I rattled the handle, whispering, "Hello? Anyone?" Silence. Complete silence. I crouched, heart hammering, trying to steady my breathing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, measured, coming down the hall outside. Not far. Too close. I pressed my ear to the door, straining. A key slid into the lock, turning with a deliberate twist. The door creaked open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted in the hallway's dim light. "Who's there?" I managed, voice cracking. The figure stepped inside, hands raised slightly. "Easy," a voice said, low and calm. "I'm not here to hurt you." I didn't lower my guard. "Who are you? What is this place? Where am I?" He hesitated, eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. "This floor, it's not what it seems. People have disappeared here. I'm trying to find out why. Like you." A flicker of relief washed over me, but it was tangled with suspicion. Why should I trust you? He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You don't have to. But we might be the only ones who can get out. The fluorescent light overhead flickered violently, buzzing louder. Shadows danced wildly, and for a moment, the hallway seemed to stretch farther than before. I swallowed again. My hands still trembled, but the taste of fear was slowly shifting into something else, determination. We need to move, the man said, nodding toward the corridor. There's more to see. More to understand. I glanced back at the closed door, the scattered papers on the desk, the faces staring out from the walls. Missing. Forgotten. Waiting. All right, I said, voice steadier than I expected. Let's figure this out. We stepped into the hallway together, the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones of our footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. Somewhere deep in the maze of rooms and shadows, secrets whispered just out of reach. And I knew no matter what happened next, I couldn't stop now. Because the elevator wasn't broken by accident. And the floors weren't random. They were traps, designed to keep us inside. And the people who built them? They were still here. Watching. Waiting. The hallway stretched ahead, the dim glow of a flickering bulb casting long, twitching shadows that made the peeling wallpaper seem alive. It smelled faintly of damp plaster and something else, old smoke, maybe, or burnt hair. I rubbed the back of my neck, the sweat there sticky despite the chill in the air. The man beside me didn't say much, just kept his eyes scanning the cracked door frames and the stained carpet beneath our feet. His breathing was steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw. We need to keep moving, he said at last, voice low, like he didn't want to disturb the silence that clung to the place like a second skin. I nodded, though part of me wanted to stop, to turn back and find the elevator again, to escape whatever this was. But the elevator was gone, vanished, like a bad dream slipping away when you try to grab it. I was trapped here, between floors, between realities that didn't quite make sense but felt horrifyingly real. We passed a door marked maintenance that hung crooked on its hinges, the paint blistered and cracked. Inside, I glimpsed a rusted metal stairwell descending into darkness. The man shook his head. Not this way, he muttered, pulling me along. I glanced back. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement just inside the doorway, a shadow shifting too quickly for me to be certain. My mouth went dry, the taste of stale air and fear thick on my tongue. Did you see that? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket pocket, flipping through pages filled with cramped handwriting and yellowed photographs. Look here, he said, tapping a black and white image of a young woman with hollow eyes, her name scrawled beneath in shaky letters. She disappeared from this building 6 months ago. Officially, she just vanished. No leads. No witnesses. I swallowed hard. And you think she's here? He looked up, eyes sharp. Not just her. All of them. The missing, the lost, they're trapped on these floors, but not like ghosts. They're real people, hiding or worse, taken by someone who doesn't want us to leave. The weight of that sank in fast. The elevator was no random malfunction. It was a prison. And we were its newest inmates. A sudden noise, a scraping, like fingernails on wood, snapped my head toward the end of the hall. The man stiffened, his hand tightening around the notebook. We're not alone, he said. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, but I forced myself to look. Nothing but the empty corridor, stretching into shadow. Could be rats, I said, though my voice cracked. He shook his head. No rats make that sound. We pushed on, moving past cracked picture frames and doors with peeling labels: office, records, janitor. The air grew colder, the faint odor of something metallic creeping in. It tasted like rust and old blood, and I gagged despite myself. At the next corner, a door ajar revealed a room frozen in time, a woman's purse overturned on the floor, a half-drunk cup of coffee stained with dust, and a calendar marked with frantic scribbles and crossed-out dates. I crouched, running my fingers over the scattered papers, notes, letters, a crumpled photograph of a child clutching a teddy bear. This was someone's life, I murmured. The man knelt beside me. And it ended here. Who does this? I asked, voice shaky. Why would anyone do this to them? He looked away, jaw tight. Because they want control. Because they're scared of what these people might tell if they got out. That hit harder than I expected. Control. Fear. The same things that grip any desperate person, twisting their sense of right and wrong until they're all tangled up in darkness. A sudden, sharp sound made us both jump. From behind, the elevator bell dinged, a hollow, mocking chime that echoed down the hall. I whipped around, heart slamming against my ribs, but the elevator doors remained shut, its metal surface gleaming cold and indifferent. It's coming, the man said, voice grim. It only stops for a moment before moving on. We don't have much time. I looked at the elevator, then back at the endless corridor. Where does it go? He hesitated. Further down, deeper into the building. The lower floors. The ones no one talks about. My stomach turned over. I wanted to argue, to say we should leave, but every instinct screamed that wasn't possible. Not anymore. We have to get on, I said, voice firm despite the tremble in my hands. If we don't, we'll never find out who's behind this. He nodded, pulling a flashlight from his bag and clicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the cracked tiles and graffiti scrawled on the walls: names, dates, warnings. Look, he said, pointing to a message scratched into the plaster. They watch. I still can't explain it. They wait. Don't trust the silence. My breath hitched. You think the people who took them missing, they're still here? Watching us. Not just watching, he said quietly. Hunting. Suddenly, the door at the far end of the hall creaked open. A figure stepped into the faint light, tall, lean, face obscured by shadow. My skin prickled, the hair on my arms standing on end. Stop, the man said, tone sharp. The figure didn't move. Just stood, silent and still. I took a step back, the rough carpet catching beneath my shoe. Who are you? I whispered. No answer. Just that slow, deliberate silence, like a predator sizing up its prey. The elevator chimed again, louder this time, closer. We don't have a choice, the man said, his voice low. We get on now, or we're trapped here forever. I glanced at the elevator doors. They slid open with a mechanical groan, revealing a cramped, dim interior smelling of oil and mildew. The buttons inside flickered erratically, some lit up, others dark. Which floor? I asked. He hesitated. I don't know. But it's not the top anymore. I swallowed, stepping inside. The air was thick and cold, the small space vibrating faintly beneath my feet. The doors slid shut behind us with a final, unforgiving clang. As we descended, the lights flickered, and the elevator jolted, not smooth, but jerky, uneven. The numbers on the panel blinked. 5, 4, 3, then stopped. The doors opened to a floor that wasn't on any building plan I'd ever seen. The walls were lined with peeling posters, missing person flyers, all of them my age or younger, some scratched over, some ripped. And in the center of the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, a table cluttered with items, a broken watch, a cracked phone screen, a pair of worn sneakers. My heart caught in my throat. "This is where they end up," I whispered. "The ones no one finds." The man closed his eyes for a moment, then set his jaw. "We're past the point of no return." Behind us, the elevator door sealed shut. Ahead, the shadows shifted, and the hunt began. The stale air hit me again as the elevator doors slid shut behind me, the faint, metallic clang ringing in the small space like a verdict. I barely registered the sound. The smell of damp plaster and old paper from that last floor lingered in my clothes, clinging like a bad memory. My hands trembled, not from cold, I was sure, but from something deep in my chest, a tightening I couldn't shake. I glanced at the empty space across from me. The man who'd stepped in with me was gone. Just like that. No elevator ding, no announcement, no rattling of cables, nothing. The doors had closed on him, but he wasn't inside anymore. My mouth dried. I swallowed hard, the taste of dust and iron sharp on my tongue. The panel of buttons flickered wildly. Numbers blinked in no order. 2, 7, 9, then a sudden blackout. The single bulb overhead sputtered, casting long, twitching shadows across the cramped metal walls. I pressed the emergency button, fingers fumbling against the cold surface, but nothing. The speaker crackled, then silence, silence. Complete silence. I leaned back against the wall, the cold steel biting through my jacket. My breath came out shallow and fast. I tried to steady it, to think. It had to be a malfunction, some trick of the aging building's decrepit wiring. But the disappearance, that was something else. Something worse. The elevator jolted violently, like it had hit something, then dropped a little, too fast. I gripped the handrail as nausea rolled in waves. The panel lit up again, this time with a single number, blinking slowly. 1. The doors slid open, not onto a lobby, but a narrow hallway. The air was thick with the scent of stale cigarettes and something metallic, almost coppery. I stepped out. The floor was covered in cracked linoleum, yellowed and brittle underfoot. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one flickering erratically. The walls were painted a faded beige, but the paint bubbled and peeled in places, revealing rough plaster beneath. I could hear murmurs, quiet, fragmented voices coming from somewhere down the hall. I strained to listen, but the words dissolved into a low hum, unintelligible, like a broken radio. I moved forward, each step echoing against the bare walls. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. My watch said 15 minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. I kept expecting to see the man from the elevator, or at least some sign of him, but there was nothing. Just the endless corridor and those whispered voices. At the end of the hall was a door, half open, swinging slowly on its hinges. I pushed it wider and peered inside. A room. Small. Like a makeshift office. Dust coated every surface. A single desk lamp flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow glow. Across the desk, a wall was plastered with photographs, maps, and notes pinned in a chaotic collage. Most of the photos were of people, young faces, some smiling, some frozen mid-laugh, others with eyes that seemed to plead silently. I recognized a few from the flyers back on the previous floor. I stepped closer, heart hammering. On the desk lay a journal, its pages dog-eared and stained. I flipped it open, fingers trembling, and began to read. They come here. Everyone thinks they just disappear. But they don't. Not really. They get swallowed by this place, caught between layers no one else knows exist. You think it's a building, a broken elevator, but it's something else. A trap. And the ones left behind? They're not gone, they're waiting. I swallowed hard, the words sinking in like cold water down my throat. Waiting. For what? For who? A sudden noise made me jump, a soft, deliberate shuffle from behind the door. I spun around. Nothing. Just shadows, but then, hey. The voice was low, rough, urgent. Male. Not far off. Who's there? I called, voice cracking. No answered. I edged toward the door, heart pounding so fiercely I thought it might burst through my ribs. I peered into the hallway beyond. Empty. The buzzing lights flickered overhead, casting intermittent daylight into the gloom. Listen, I said, almost whispering now. If you're real, I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand. What is this place? Silence again, then footsteps. Quick, deliberate. Coming closer, I backed into the room, my foot catching on something. A small box. I looked down. Inside, dozens of keys. Rusted, bent, some missing teeth. Each labeled with a name. A key for every missing person. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. My breath hitched. I gripped one of the keys, cold and heavy in my palm. The door creaked open slowly. A man stepped inside, thin, pale, eyes sunken but sharp. He was older than me, maybe in his 40s, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes hung loose, stained with dirt and something dark. You shouldn't be here, he said, voice gravelly. I could say the same. I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. He studied me for a long moment. You don't know what you're dealing with. Maybe. But I'm not leaving until I find out. He laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You really think this is about some elevator? This place isn't a building. It's a prison. I swallowed hard. Who put you here? He shook his head. No one put me. I walked in, just like you. Got pulled in by the same trap. You think those missing people just vanished? They didn't. They're here. Trapped between floors, caught in layers no one else sees. I felt the weight of his words settle over me, thick and cold. Why? I asked. Why trap people here? He looked away. It's not why. It's how. People like us, they're dangerous. They see too much, ask too many questions. This place, it holds them. Keeps them quiet. I swallowed again, the taste bitter, like ash. Are you one of them? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. Yeah. And I'm not the only one. There's others, some worse than me. The lights flickered violently, then went out. Darkness swallowed the room whole. I fumbled with the keys in my hand, heart racing. Somewhere nearby, a door slammed shut. A low growl of anger, or was it desperation, filled the air. Listen, I said, voice urgent. If you really want out, we have to work together. He was silent for a long beat. Then, finally, he sighed. Fine. But no promises. This place, it changes people. Makes monsters out of the lost. I nodded, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. Let's find a way, I said. Good luck, he muttered, stepping toward the door. Wait, I called after him. What's your name? He paused, then looked back. Call me Harper. And just like that, he disappeared into the black corridor. I stood alone in the dark, the key heavy in my palm, my breath the only sound. Somewhere, deep inside the building, something was waiting. Watching. Hunting, and I was right in the middle of it. The darkness clung to me like a second skin after he left. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was alone again, with only the faint hum of the building's old wiring buzzing somewhere overhead. That low growl, whatever it was, anger, desperation, echoed in my ears. Silence. Complete silence. I could taste the bitterness in my mouth again, like burnt coffee left too long in the pot. Ashed, I fumbled with the keys in my pocket, fingers trembling. I didn't know what to do next. I wanted to chase after him, ask his name, beg for answers, but that would have been reckless. I had no idea if I could trust him or if he was just another layer of the nightmare this building had become. The elevator was gone. The buttons on the panel flickered weakly, a sickly yellow glow that barely reached my trembling hands. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold, cracked floor, trying to steady my breath. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. It made my stomach twist. I kept thinking about what he said, people like us. Dangerous. Seen too much. Asked too many questions. I wondered if I was already too far gone, if I had crossed some invisible line that separated the lost from the sane. Maybe I was already one of them, hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't make sense down here. My phone was dead, the screen cracked and useless. I pressed my forehead against the wall and let the cold seep through my skin. Outside, somewhere above, I could hear the city breathing, distant car horns, a dog barking sporadically, footsteps behind glass. A life I could reach but not touch. I closed my eyes and tried to piece it all together. The floors, the twisted versions of reality where missing people vanished. The faces I'd seen, the echoes of their fears and rage. The man's warning about monsters born from silence and secrets. I had to get out. But how? I wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. Not if the truth was this ugly. Then, a faint sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too close. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I pressed myself tighter against the wall, heart hammering so loud I was sure it would give me away. The door creaked open, light spilling in like a blade. He stepped inside, face shadowed but eyes sharp. Didn't think you'd still be here, he said, voice low. I didn't answer. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into palms. He crouched beside me, pulling a small flashlight from his jacket. The beam was weak but steady, cutting through the gloom. We don't have much time, he said. They're coming. Who? My voice cracked. The bitterness in my mouth was gone, replaced by a dry itch in my throat. Others like me, he said. But worse. The ones who lost themselves completely. They patrol the floors, hunting anyone trying to leave. They want to keep the secret buried. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the tremor in my limbs. Why are you helping me? He looked away, the flashlight shaking slightly. Because I'm tired of being trapped. And because, maybe you're the one who can end this. His words hit me like a punch. Me? A nobody caught in a nightmare I barely understood. I stood up slowly, pushing past the numbness. The floor beneath was rough, the plaster crumbling, dust settling in the hollows of the walls. The stale air thickened as we moved toward the stairwell. No elevator this time. Only the stairs, endless, winding, descending deeper. We climbed down, step by step, the sound of our breathing loud in the silence. Outside the stairwell, the floor shifted, rooms filled with memories warped by fear and absence. Faces pressed against windows, voices whispering just out of reach. I wanted to stop, to scream, but I kept moving. At one point, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a cracked mirror, a stranger staring back. Pale, wild-eyed, shadows beneath my skin. I blinked, and it was gone. We reached a door marked basement. He hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside was a small, grimy room with peeling paint and a single table. On it lay a stack of files, photographs, scraps of paper, evidence of the missing people, their lives catalogued like objects in a collection. I picked up a photo, worn at the edges, a young woman with bright eyes, smiling despite the faded print. Her name was scribbled underneath. Claire, Claire, I whispered. She's one of them. He nodded. Her brother came here looking for her. Didn't make it out. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just a building trapping people. It was a trap for everyone who cared enough to look. What now? I asked. He looked at me, eyes glinting with something I couldn't place. Hope? Defiance? Madness? We expose it, he said. Whatever it takes. I swallowed again. The bitterness was back, but this time I tasted something else beneath it, determination. We spent the next hours gathering what we could. Names, stories, proof. Every scrap a scream from the past, begging for release. When dawn finally broke, pale light spilling through cracked windows, I stepped outside for the first time in what felt like forever. The air was crisp, sharp with the smell of rain and city dust. I breathed it in deeply, the taste of freedom bitter and sweet, but the weight didn't lift. Not entirely. The secret still lingered, heavy in my chest. I looked back at the building, silent, still. A monument to forgotten people and the monsters they became. I knew I wasn't the same person who had taken that elevator. The layers I'd passed through had stripped me bare, shown me the darkness beneath the surface of normal life. But maybe that was the point, maybe the only way out was through. I didn't know what would come next. The fight ahead was uncertain, dangerous. But I wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a reason to keep moving. The memories would haunt me. The voices would echo. The truth would never be clean or easy, but I had a story to tell. And I was ready to tell it. The elevator doors might close again, but this time, I would be waiting on the other side. Story 6, Lost Trail, Deadly Traps in the Woods. The morning air was sharp, cool enough to bite at my cheeks but soft on my lungs as I pulled my jacket tighter and stepped onto the trail. I checked my pack, the familiar weight pressing against my back. Water bottle, granola bars, compass, first aid kit. I always made sure to carry the essentials. It was a habit I developed after a few too many careless missteps in the woods. Not here, though. This stretch of the Appalachian foothills was supposed to be safe. Popular, even. Families, joggers, birdwatchers, everyone kept to the trail they knew, yet as I walked, a prickling sensation crept up my neck. Like the forest was watching. I told myself it was just nerves. That I was imagining things because I'd spent too many nights reading crime stories on my phone instead of sleeping. I stopped to adjust my boots, wiping a thin film of dew off the laces. The damp soil smelled earthy, rich, the faint tang of pine needles underfoot mixing with something else. Smoke? No. Maybe charred wood, or old leaves burning somewhere far off. It wasn't unpleasant, just unusual. I glanced down the path. The trail, which should have curved left at the next fork, seemed to veer slightly right. I frowned. Maybe I just misremembered. I'd done this hike a dozen times in the past year, but I wasn't exactly a cartographer. Still, I marched on, eyes scanning for the familiar blue blaze that marked the official route. Nothing. No blaze. No signpost. The trees looked older here, denser too, their trunks gnarled and thick with moss. The sun filtered through the canopy in faint, flickering patches, but the light felt colder, thinner. I pulled out my phone and squinted at the GPS. The signal was weak, barely a blip. The map showed the trail, but my little blue dot was off. A few feet to the right. I shook my head. Probably just some glitch, I muttered. The wind picked up, rustling leaves with a dry, brittle sound. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked 3 times, sharp and urgent, then silence. Complete silence. I swallowed hard and took a step forward. The path narrowed, the underbrush closing in. I brushed against low-hanging branches, feeling the rough bark scrape my forearm. A sudden chill ran down my spine, too cold for early October. I glanced back. The trail behind me seemed normal enough, the familiar markers still faintly visible if I squinted, but ahead? Ahead was a different story. The earth here was trampled unevenly, like someone had been dragging something heavy. I paused, my boots sinking slightly into soft mud. There, half hidden beneath a tangle of leaves, was a rusted metal trap, one of those jaw traps used for catching animals. My hands trembled as I knelt to examine it. No, it wasn't a hunting trap. This was the kind of device you'd expect to find in a war zone or a remote survivalist stash. Whoever left it here didn't want just animals caught. I stood up quickly, heart hammering. My breath came out in short bursts, visible in the cooling air. "Hello?" I called out, voice uneven. No answer. I wanted to turn back, to head for the creek and maybe find a ranger or another hiker. But the path behind me seemed different somehow. Less certain. The trees looked farther apart, the blazes less defined. I took another step forward. The smell of smoke was stronger now, acrid, sharp, unmistakable. Up ahead, through the trees, I saw something else. A glimpse of canvas, stretched tight over wooden poles. A makeshift shelter, weather-beaten and half-collapsed. Instinct told me to ignore it, to keep walking until I found the main trail again. But curiosity, stubborn and nagging, pulled me closer. As I approached, the sounds of the forest seemed to dim, swallowed by the thickening shadows. The smell of smoke wrapped around me like a warning. There were footprints in the mud, deep and fresh. Not animal prints. Human. Heavy boots. I crouched to look closer, heart in my throat. They led away from the shelter, disappearing into the dense woods. I swallowed again. I should have turned back. I had to turn back, but I didn't. The shelter was empty, save for a few scattered bones. Animal, I hoped, half buried in the dirt floor. Nearby, a rusted barrel, blackened inside, leaned against a tree. The faint crackle of embers whispered from within. Something else caught my eye, a faded sign nailed to a tree, half obscured by ivy. The letters were worn, but I made out the words, "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." The kind of warning that meant more than just a property dispute. I backed away slowly, senses sharp. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint, distant sound, a low murmur of voices, or maybe the scrape of boots on dry leaves. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat, and then I heard it clearly. A twig snapped behind me. I didn't turn around, not yet. I didn't want to know who or what was watching, but I knew, somehow, that it wasn't the forest. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down, cold and unyielding. I forced my legs to move, each step measured and quiet, heart pounding like a drum. Somewhere ahead, a shadow shifted between the trees, deliberate and slow. The twig snapped again, sharper this time. I didn't turn around. Not yet. I told myself I'd wait for the next sound. A footstep, a breath, a voice. Something human. Something that would explain everything. But the only reply was silence. Complete silence. After what felt like an eternity, I forced my legs to move. Just a few slow, careful steps forward, away from the rusted barrel and the faded sign. I kept my eyes scanning the dim shapes of trees, trunks thick with moss, branches low and twisting, as if they were reaching for me. The smell of charred lingered heavy in the air, smoke from a fire that had burned too long ago to be comforting. I knew I shouldn't have stayed past sundown, but something had pulled me deeper into those woods, past the boundaries of the trail I'd hiked so many times before. The trail that was supposed to be clear and familiar. That was the thing. It wasn't familiar anymore. Not exactly. I stopped beside a tree, tracing my fingers along the rough bark. The sign, "No trespassing," had been the first concrete proof that this place wasn't just off limits, it was dangerous. My mind flicked back to the campfire, to the embers barely breathing in the barrel. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, or maybe they were still close by. The thought made my skin crawl. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course. The deeper woods always killed any chance of a connection. I wasn't surprised, but it hit me harder than I expected. No way to call for help. No way to text, just me. I swallowed, the dry taste of panic rising in my throat. I had to find out more. I had to understand what I'd stumbled into. The next morning came slow and gray, the sky thick with low clouds that muted the light. I'd camped in a small clearing not far from the rusted barrel, careful to stay hidden. My sleep was restless, every crack of a branch or whisper of wind jolting me awake. I thought about turning back, about heading straight for the trailhead and out of these woods. But the pull of curiosity was stronger, stubborn, like a knot twisting in my gut. I packed up quickly, eyes darting to every sound. My hands trembled as I tightened the straps on my pack, the coarse fabric rough against my palms. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves hung heavy, mixing with the faint metallic tang of something else, something I couldn't quite place. I moved cautiously back to the spot where I'd seen the campfire. The ground was soft and uneven, littered with broken twigs and dark stains that might have been old blood or rust. I knelt down, brushing dirt aside to reveal a flattened patch of earth, the remnants of a makeshift fire pit. Charcoal and ash clung to the soil, black and brittle. Nearby, I spotted more signs. A loop of wire sneaking through the brush, sharp and rusty, tangled with strips of cloth. A battered metal trap, partially buried, its spring still taut and deadly. The kind of trap you don't set for squirrels. My stomach turned. I pulled out my notebook and scribbled quick notes, the lines jagged and hurried. Traps, I wrote. Campfire. No trespassing sign. Possibly active. The words felt heavy, like a warning. From somewhere ahead came a faint sound, a low murmur, almost like voices. I froze, straining to listen. No shouting, no laughter. Just a murmur. I couldn't tell if it was one person or many. The forest swallowed the sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones almost as quickly as it appeared to. I debated turning back, but the thought of retreat felt like admitting defeat. I needed to know who had set these traps and why. Whoever they were, they didn't want visitors. That much was clear. As I moved forward, something caught my eye, a glint of metal beneath a pile of leaves. I knelt and brushed them aside to reveal a rusted hunting knife, blade darkened with age. The handle was wrapped in worn leather, scarred and stained. I ran my finger along the edge, careful not to cut myself. A shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just a poacher's camp. This was a hideout. A place someone had called home, in the middle of nowhere, away from prying eyes and lost. I glanced around, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in. No birds. No rustling leaves. Just the faint, distant murmur of voices, and the soft crackling of dry branches underfoot. Then I heard it again, closer this time. A dog barking. Sharp and sudden, breaking the quiet. My heart leapt into my throat. I scrambled to my feet, eyes darting wildly. Hello? I called out, voice breaking. Is someone there? Silence. The barking stopped. I stood frozen, every muscle tense, waiting for a response. Nothing. Then, behind me, the unmistakable snap of a branch, slow footsteps, heavy, deliberate. I didn't turn. But I knew. They were watching, and I was trapped. No trail. No signal. No way out, only the deep, dark woods, and whatever or whoever was hunting me. A cold sweat slicked down my back as the footsteps drew nearer, each step echoing like a hammer in the stillness. My mind raced, searching for a plan, any plan. I edged toward a gnarled tree, hoping to blend into its shadows. The air thickened, charged with a tension that clawed at my throat. Then, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it, broke the silence. The whisper came again, softer this time, like a breath, or maybe a warning. I blinked into the dark, trying to spot the source, but all I could see were shadows. The forest felt impossibly dense, the trees pressing in so close I could almost reach out and touch bark on both sides without moving. The trail, the one I trusted for years, was gone. Swallowed whole by this silent, watching wilderness. Footsteps again, slow and heavy. Closer. My hands trembled, not loud enough to betray me, but enough that I noticed. I pressed my back against the rough trunk behind me, the bark biting into my shirt, grounding me. The cool night air was damp and smelled of pine needles and wet earth, but beneath it all, That faint metallic tang lingered, something I couldn't place but knew was wrong. "Hey," I whispered, voice cracking. "I don't want trouble." No answer. Only the faint crackle of dead leaves underfoot, moving deliberately, like a predator stalking prey. I swallowed, dry, and forced myself to scan the ground. My flashlight, barely holding a flicker, caught something, a twisted length of wire, snagged on a root. It looked like a snare. My heart hammered against my ribs. Snare traps. I'd read about them, sure, meant for animals, but sometimes used by poachers to catch whatever they wanted. Unforgiving. Deadly. "Who's there?" I tried again, louder this time, voice echoing oddly among the trees. "I'm lost. I don't want any trouble." Silence. Then, a rustle, closer. A figure stepped into the faint beam of my flashlight, just enough to catch a glimpse of heavy boots, worn jeans, and a long coat blending into the dark. "Lost, huh?" The voice was low, rough, like gravel sliding down a hill. "You don't belong here." I forced a laugh, shaky. "No, not really. I took a wrong turn. Just trying to find my way back." The figure didn't answer. Instead, a dog barked, sharp, sudden, and close enough to make me jump. The dog's eyes caught the light, yellow and unblinking, fixed on me like a warning. I took a step back, tripping on a root. The man, or whoever he was, moved faster than I expected, blocking my path. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, raising my hands slowly. "Just let me go." He didn't move, didn't say a word. The dog crawled low in its throat, muscles taut. A cold knot tightened in my gut. I was trapped. This wasn't random. The camp I'd stumbled onto yesterday, the remnants of old poacher traps, the rusted cans, the makeshift shelter barely hidden, it wasn't abandoned. Not really. I realized then this was their territory. And I was an intruder. "Why are you here?" the man finally asked, voice quiet but sharp, like a knife scraping stone. I hesitated. Did I tell the truth? That I was just hiking? That I'd followed the trail, only to find it gone? That I'd been watching, trying to piece it together? No, none of that sounded right. "I'm just passing through," I said instead. "I didn't mean to come here." He studied me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stepped aside, motioning with a crooked finger. "Follow. Stay close." I didn't like it, but I had no choice. The woods seemed to close in tighter, and I knew if I ran, I'd only get lost deeper. So, I followed up. We moved through the underbrush, the dog padding silently at our heels. The man's pace was steady, practiced, like he knew every inch of this forest. The smell of smoke grew stronger, mingling with the damp earth and something coppery, blood. I tried not to think about it. After what felt like forever, we arrived at a clearing. The remnants of the poacher's camp sprawled before me, a fire pit blackened with soot, a tarp strung between trees, and a scattering of equipment, rifles stacked carefully, traps laid out on logs, and a faded map pinned to a tree trunk. The man crouched by the fire pit, poking at the ashes with a stick. "Been here a long time," he said, voice quieter now. "Hunting more than deer." My skin prickled. What did he mean? I glanced around, catching glimpses of empty cages barely hidden beneath the brush. Something moved quick, shadowy, just beyond the firelight. "Who else?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged. "Friends. Family. Poachers don't work alone." I swallowed hard, the weight of it settling in. This wasn't just some rogue outpost. It was a network. A hidden world with its own rules, rules I was about to break by being here. The dog barked again, sharp and urgent. The man stood quickly, eyes narrowing. "You stay quiet now. Don't wander. We don't like surprises." I nodded, heart hammering so loud I was sure it would give me away. The chill of the night crept into my bones, but I forced myself to stay still. I wanted to ask questions. So many. But something told me now wasn't the time. The fire crackled, throwing flickering shadows over the man's face, hard and unreadable. I glanced down and saw my own reflection in a puddle, pale and uncertain. This was no longer a hike. Not a detour. This was something else entirely. Beyond the clearing, deeper in the woods, I heard voices rough, low, and urgent. Plans being made. Warnings whispered. Somewhere out there, more of them waited. I was trapped. Somewhere I couldn't call for help, couldn't run in the dark without risking the snare traps or worse, and they knew no turning back. Not anymore. The man looked at me then, ice cold but not unkind. You want out? He asked quietly. You stay alive. You do what I say. I nodded again, the taste of dirt and fear thick in my mouth. Good, he said. Because out there, the woods don't forgive mistakes. The night held its breath, and I was caught inside it. The night pressed in closer, cold, dark, and thick enough to swallow sound whole. I stayed crouched by the fire, muscles coiled, trying to slow my breathing, but the crackle and pop of burning wood felt like a drumbeat in my chest. The man's eyes caught the flames, reflecting something unreadable, maybe calculation, maybe caution. I couldn't tell. Oh, I did know. There was no easy way out. Not with those voices weaving through the trees like shadows hunting me. Stay alive, he said again, the words settled in my bones, sharp and heavy, like a promise or a warning, maybe both. I swallowed, tasting grit and sweat, and nodded. He flicked a glance toward the dark beyond the clearing, where the voices tangled with the rustle of leaves and the snap of distant branches. They're watching, he said, voice low. You move wrong, they'll find you. A pause, and they won't ask twice. I wanted to ask if they were poachers, I guess, but why? What were they hunting besides their own shadows? But the firelight made his face a mask. And no answers there, just a quiet that pressed down on me. A sudden crack from the woods made me flinch, branches snapping under heavy boots. Maybe. The man's gaze sharpened. You hear that? He whispered. Get ready. His hand went to a worn rifle slung over his shoulder, old, but deadly, and I knew it wasn't just for show. My hands trembled, fingers curling around a jagged stick at my side. I wasn't armed, not really, not like this. Who are they? I asked, voice rough. He didn't answer. Instead, he motioned with a nod, pulling me up from the dirt. Walk with me. I followed. The fires glowed dim behind us, swallowed by the thick underbrush as we moved deeper into the woods. Trust me. I was there. The air turned colder, damp with the smell of moss and decay. Every step felt like sinking, like the earth was trying to pull me under. I kept my head down, trying not to think about what waited ahead. After a few minutes, we reached a narrow path, barely wide enough for one person. Twisted roots snaked across it, thick and tangled like the lies I was starting to piece together. The man stopped, crouched low, and pointed toward a cluster of trees ahead. Camp, he said, not just any camp. Point one they've hidden for years. I blinked, heart kicking up. Years? That explained the rusted traps, the makeshift snares I'd stumbled over. But what kind of people lived out here so long, so hidden? They're careful, he whispered. Too careful. They don't want anyone finding this place, especially not the law. His eyes flicked to mine, which means you're dead weight. The words hit me like a punch. I swallowed hard, voice barely a breath. So, what now? He hesitated. You can't stay. His tone was flat, resigned, and you can't go back. I shook my head, but I have to. I need to get out. He snorted, a harsh sound that didn't reach his eyes. Out? You think this forest has an exit? Not for you, not anymore. I felt the panic rising, thick and cold, creeping down my spine. And my hands were shaking too much to steady the flashlight I pulled from my pack, but I flicked it on anyway. The beam cut through the black, landing on a small clearing ahead. There, half hidden in shadow, was a tangle of tense old canvas, patched with whatever scraps they could find. A rusted barrel smoked faintly. The scent of burnt metal and damp wood curling up. I swallowed again, tasting copper and fear. Somewhere close, a dog barked. Sharp, Urgent. The man's eyes darted toward the sound. They've got dogs, he said, and they use 'em well. A distant howl answered the bark, raw and wild. Listen, he said, voice dropping to a whisper. If you want out, you follow me, but you don't speak. You don't move unless I tell you. Point one wrong step, and it's over. I nodded, heart slamming. We crept forward, shadows slipping between the trees as if the darkness itself was part of the plan. The camp was worse than I imagined. Tracks worn deep into the dirt, piles of bones half buried beneath leaves, and signs of traps everywhere. The smell of rotten sweat made my stomach turn. Near a makeshift table, I saw knives laid out, old hunting blades, their edges nicked and dull but still menacing. Nearby, a tattered journal lay open, pages yellowed and stained. I recognized the handwriting from a scrap I found days ago. Someone meticulous, obsessed, and dangerous. The man knelt beside it, eyes scanning quickly. He keeps records, names, dates, what he's taken. My throat tightened. This wasn't just a poacher's camp. It was a shrine. A warning. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind us. I froze, breath caught. The man's hand went to his rifle again, fingers tightening. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, tall, lean, eyes sharp as knives. She wore a faded jacket, the emblem of some forgotten militia stitched on the sleeve. She stared at us, lips pressed tight. Who's this? She demanded. The man's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. A guest, lost. The woman's eyes narrowed. We don't take guests. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her gaze. I'm just trying to get out, I managed. She stepped closer, the scent of earth and sweat heavy in the air. Out. You don't get to just walk away. Not now. A sudden shuffling behind her, more figures, shadows multiplying. The man stood, rifle raised slowly. You want trouble? Her laugh was low, bitter. Trouble's already here. The night exploded, shouts, commands barked in rough voices, dogs barking, growling, the sharp crack of a rifle. I dove to the ground, dirt and leaves scraping my skin. Wires rang, the firelight flickered weakly against the trees, throwing monstrous shadows that danced and twisted. Pain blossomed in my leg, a sharp, searing stab. I gasped, tasting blood. The man dragged me behind a fallen log, his face grim. We hold here, he said, voice urgent. Can you move? I tried, but the world spun. Stay with me, he said. You're not done yet. The air was thick with smoke and fear, the night alive with danger. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused. And through it all, I realized something brutal. This wasn't just survival. It was a war, and I was already in the middle of it. The night didn't end with the gunfire. The man beside me, his name was Tom. I'd learned in the few moments between chaos, kept his rifle close, eyes darting through the thinning dark. He was breathing hard, but steady. The dogs had gone silent hours ago, and the camp shouts had faded into something like murmurs, then nothing at all. Silence. Complete silence. I tried to move my leg again. It stung, but I could flex my toes. That was something. How bad? I asked, voice rough and cracked. I didn't want to know the answer. Tom didn't look at me. You're lucky. Bullet grazed a muscle, missed the bone. We'll get you out of here. He sounded sure, but I wasn't so certain. Lucky? I tasted bitter blood on my tongue. Luck was a funny thing. We waited for the sun to climb higher, the woods waking with birdsong that felt foreign after the night's violence. I smelled damp earth, pine needles crushed underfoot, and something else, smoke, faint but persistent. The campfire's ghost. It lingered in the air like a warning. Tom finally whispered, "We can move soon. I know a way out, but it's rough." I nodded, swallowing a dry cough. The truth was, I didn't want to move. Not yet. Not until I'd seen everything I needed to see. The poachers camped their traps, the cages, the bloodstains hidden beneath leaves. Those images had burned into my mind. There was no way to undo what I'd uncovered. No way to pretend it wasn't real. You're brave, Tom said suddenly, voice low. Most wouldn't have lasted past the first shot. I laughed, a ragged sound. Brave? I was just stupid. He didn't argue. Maybe he agreed. Or maybe he just didn't want to waste energy on words. Hours later, with the sun high enough to burn away the last shadows, we started moving. Tom helped me stand, his hands firm but gentle. The pain flared, but I bit it back. The woods around us felt different now, less a place of adventure, more a trap. Every snapped twig, every rustle was a reminder. We weren't just hikers or wanderers. We were trespassers in a world that didn't want us to. We took a route Tom knew, one that twisted through thick underbrush, crossed a shallow creek where the water tasted cold and sharp. I cupped it in my hands, trying to wash away the grime, the blood, the fear. But none of it would come off. Not really. At one point, Tom stopped and looked back at me, eyes dark beneath a hat shadowed by branches. "You're gonna be okay," he said. "We'll get you to the ranger station. Get you help." I wanted to believe him. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. But part of me stayed tangled in the woods, in the camp, in everything that had happened. The poachers weren't just hunters gone rogue, they were ghosts of a darker past, hidden from the world, and now I carried their story. By mid-afternoon, the ranger station came into view, a small wooden building with faded paint and a tin roof that clanged softly in the breeze. I felt a surge of relief, sudden and overwhelming, and then another wave of exhaustion that made my legs buckle. They helped me inside, laid me on a cot, and called for help. The paramedics arrived quickly, efficient and calm. They cleaned my wound, wrapped it tight, and gave me something for the pain that dulled the edges of the nightmare. As I lay there, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my nose, I thought about the forest, the shifting trails, the hidden dangers. About how something as simple as a path could become a snare. About how close I'd come to being lost, not just in the woods, but in a story I wasn't meant to be part of. The officers who came to take my statement asked questions I barely had the strength to answer. Names, locations, descriptions. I gave what I could. They promised to investigate, to send teams to the area, to find those men. The poachers, but I knew it wouldn't be that simple. People like them didn't disappear overnight. The woods were their home, their refuge. They had time, patience, and the darkness on their side. Later, as night fell again, I found myself staring out the window of the station, the forest beyond, a dark wall of memories. My hands trembled, not from the pain, but from everything I'd seen and done. I realized something had changed inside me. The easy comfort of ignorance was gone. I was marked now, not just by the bullet, but by the truth. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams tangled with the crack of rifles, the low growl of dogs, the faces of the men who hunted in the shadows. When morning finally came, it felt like waking from a long, terrible dream. Except it wasn't a dream. It was real. In the weeks that followed, I visited a counselor, tried to piece myself back together. The physical scars healed faster than the invisible ones. I found solace in small things: morning coffee, the rough bark of a tree I could touch without fear, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I kept the journal I'd started on the trail, pages filled with scribbles and sketches of the camp, maps of the shifting paths. I promised myself I'd tell the story right. Not as a sensational headline, but as a warning. A reminder. Sometimes, when the wind shifted just right and the scent of pine filled the air, I thought I heard distant barking, or the faint crack of a rifle far off in the woods. My body tensed, muscles coiled with a memory I couldn't shake, but I was no longer just a victim. I was a witness, a survivor, and maybe, one day, that would be enough, because in those woods, where darkness had once ruled, something else had taken root: resilience. Quiet, stubborn, and real. I stood for a long time at the edge of the forest one afternoon, feeling the rough bark against my palm, the earth cool beneath my boots. The trail was there, winding and uncertain. It called to me, not with promises of safety, but with the challenge of facing what lurked inside. I didn't know if I'd ever walk it again, but I was ready, not to forget, not to remember. To fight, and to keep moving forward, one step at a time.